getting it right. Been up them days and I've been up them nights. I got the plan and I didn't look twice. All for the simplest life.
They saw what she needed. If you could provide them, then she won't be leaving. The man in my family can't be no teachers. You learn what you see and no money can't be the security for it, but it's important even if you're poor. Why picket fence and a reef on the door? We from the basement, concrete's on the floor.
Concrete on the deck with a rim, I'm calling check. In a simple autumn weather, get my daughter all that's left when her father laid to rest. The money never made me, I'm more than I invest. In the morning I'm a mess, but waking up next to makes it worth it. Said I put in more effort. Said I can't be perfect, but I
woke up the days that I'm getting it right. Been up them days and I've been up the nights. I got the plan and I didn't look twice. All for the simplest life. I put the pain in the shit that I write. Can't give a straight, gotta give it some time. Hop off the train at the end of the line. That was a simpler time.
Paint a new picture perfect.
Woke up the days that I'm getting it right. Been up them days and I've been up the nights. I got the plan and I didn't look twice. All for the simplest life. I put the pain in the shit that I write. Can't give a straight, gotta give it some time. Hop off the train at the end of the line. That was a simpler time.
I've been renewed. No day, a new try. No calling on my life. Gotta get it, gotta strive. But I'm going all for it. He done really blessed the boy. Before I can ask for it. He gave me life, he gave me more. He gave me driving, now I'm whipping. There's so much power in the vision. All of the past has been forgiven. I gotta get it, gotta get it. Gotta get it, I know it's power in a vision. And I can't be walking by his side where my faith leading. I know he got in every move, so I move different. So every when you see me, just know my God did it. I just walked away. I had to surrender to her and let go the pain. You gave me drive and I ain't been whipping the same. I gave you the will and you put me in my own lane. Amen, amen. I've been renewed. No day, a new try. I know a calling on my life. Gotta get it, gotta strive. But I'm going all for it. He done really blessed the boy. Before I can ask for it. He gave me life, he gave me more. He gave me driving, now I'm whipping. There's so much power in the vision. All of the past has been forgiven. I gotta get it, gotta get it. I won't conform to the world, I gotta renew my mind. I gotta pray up, I know it all take time. I know your words so divine. I know we'd all fall in line. Every word you provide, I'm holding on. If we down, then it won't be long. Tapped into the source, now it's in decline like it's overdrawn. We so on, we way up. Ever since you saved us, it's lit up. I've been renewed. New day, a new try. I know calling on my life. Gotta get it, gotta strive. But I'm going all for it. He done really blessed the boy. Before I could ask for it. He gave me life and gave me more. He gave me driving, now I'm whipping. There's so much power in the vision. All of the past has been forgiven. I gotta get it, gotta get it.
Imagine you're a 12-year-old child being awakened before dawn by the screams of gunshots and premature death. Leaving for school in the morning, greeted by yellow tape, white chalk, and the smell of gunpowder while fighting to maintain your balance, slipping on shells of ammunition and empty crack cocaine vials. On your journey to school, you see blood caked into the concrete from someone's soul having bled from their corpse just a few hours earlier. You look in every direction of your village and see nothing but the reality of death, despair, and the curse of intergenerational illiteracy and poverty, all denying you the audacity to hope for anything better. You're mere blocks away from the U.S. Capitol, U.S. Supreme Court, and the White House. This was my village, the village that raised me in the nation's capital in the 1980s and 90s.
Congresswoman Gabbard, you took issue with Senator Harris confronting Vice President Biden at the last debate. You called it a, quote, false accusation that Joe Biden is a racist. What's your response?
I want to bring the conversation back to the broken criminal justice system that is disproportionately negatively impacting Black and brown people all across this country today. Now, Senator Harris says she's proud of her record as a prosecutor and that she'll be a prosecutor president, but I'm deeply concerned about this record.
I did the work of significantly reforming the criminal justice system of a state of 40 million people, which became a national model for the work that needs to be done. And I am proud of that work. And I am proud of making a decision to not just give fancy speeches or be in a legislative body and give speeches on the floor, but actually doing the work of being in the position to use the power that I had to reform a system that is badly in need of reform. That is why we created initiatives that were about reentering former offenders and getting them counseling. It is why, and because I know that criminal justice system is so broken, that I am an advocate for what we need to do to not only decriminalize, but legalize marijuana in the United States.
I want to bring Congresswoman Gabbard back in. Your response.
The people who suffered under your reign as prosecutor, you owe them an apology.
The criminal justice system in America is deeply flawed and it must be reformed. And that's why I have dedicated myself to doing the work of, one, focusing on vulnerable populations and making sure they are safe, and equally focusing on what we need to do to reform the criminal justice system. When we know a system needs to be reformed, when we know it's broken, there is certainly a role on the outside, but we also should not take ourselves out of the opportunity to be on the inside. When I created a reentry initiative, when I was the elected district attorney of San Francisco, focused on young men, getting them jobs and counseling, people would say to me, what are you doing? DAs would not know what reentry meant. They would literally ask me, what does the word mean? Mm-hmm. Two, people, Democrats and Republicans, would say to me, what are you doing? Your job is to put people in jail, not let them out of jail.
Mm-hmm. I get what you're saying, but I think Black people just have questions for people who may not know who exactly you are. So it's just basic questions. Like, so they say they want to know, what did you do to hurt Black people as a prosecutor? Because you said you regret some things.
Well, what I regret is not having done enough.
Mm-hmm.
I regret not having done enough. If I had been there longer, if I had had more in terms of bandwidth, I would have done more around creating initiatives, for example, in the juvenile justice system. That was something that was always on my agenda to focus on. I didn't get to that.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say this, that I know also that the reentry initiatives that I created were a model back when I did it. They are shutting down pattern and practice investigations into police departments around this country that have a proven record of discrimination and racism. They're shutting those down. Those need to be reinvigorated. Consent decrees. My full intention would be to bring those back up, which is looking at how we need to monitor what is happening around proven racism and discrimination in the criminal justice system.
Mass incarceration is a national crisis.
None of us are free until we are all free. Some of the most amazing and brilliant and compassionate people that I know is still behind those walls.
It's taking away the power, it's taking away any strength that the community has when we continue to take our people out and put them into incarceration, which is a traumatic experience. And then we have them come out and they are second-class citizens.
That's amazing to see that many people supporting you and celebrating you getting out. How long were you in?
5.5 months. Yeah, 5.5 months, yeah.
Yeah. Well, you're out now, and so you're the face of criminal justice reform. And did you ever imagine you would get to this point?
Just having, growing up in the environment I grew up in, it wasn't never really, a lot of support. You got support from, your mother. If you had a father, you had that type of support, but we didn't really get a lot of support. So I wanted to, pay the people back that actually came out and, supported me and really just make what's right.
Yeah.
Because a lot of these things don't make sense, and everybody know they don't make sense, but nobody focusing on changing the
Well,
system.
you're going to help a lot of people because a lot of people are going to listen to that. And it's, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. There are a lot of people in jail that don't need to be, or in prison that don't need to be in prison. They just sit there and wait and wait and wait, and it needs to be changed. It really does. So I'm glad you're doing it, and shout out to your friends who are watching in prison right now.
Yeah,
hey, everybody.
shout out to the whole Chester, the whole, everybody that held me down.
You talk about how there's no coincidence when you compare the plantation and the prison. This was the plan since abolition. I think we can reach general agreement among people of all different political persuasions today that the criminal justice system needs to be reformed. But what's the basis for saying that today it's all part of a plan to keep people subjugated?
I've been on probation since I was 19 years old. I'm 31 years old. Growing up in the system, I always thought this was normal. And I didn't value myself the way that I value myself now. And as I look back at it, just seeing people work in prison for 8 cents an hour, not really be able to pay their dues and pay their debts back to society. They was paying their debts back to the system, and money was being made.
I know, but in the video you say this is part of the plan, that it's all about subjugation of African Americans, and I'm not understanding where's the evidence for that.
Yeah, my vision of it is I see that some of these statutes and laws are basically targeted towards a certain group of people where we are trapped inside of a system that's extremely hard up for us to get out and control. I don't know who made it. I don't know who responsible it became. Many years before me, I was born into the system, into this lifestyle, and I don't feel like anybody is addressing it to try to help fix things. It's a lot of things in the system that clearly don't make sense to the world, but it's going on today, and it's keeping many young black men caught up in the system without even committing crime.
Your friend, our friend, Senator Tim Scott, he had a police reform bill that he was trying to get passed, and it had a lot of the right things in it about more body cameras, less chokeholds, more regulations. The Democrats filibustered the bill. In a time where you need some level of meeting in the middle, and it feels like that police reform bill that Tim Scott was trying to put together was an attempt at meeting in the middle. Can we really show the American people in this election cycle that nothing is better than something?
We have not found the common ground necessary to get a bill introduced. We're still working on it. We still are having dialogue literally as most recent as last week to try to find a way, because we both agree, and Tim has told compelling stories on the Senate floor about what it's like growing up as a black man in America and having that disproportionate treatment. There's some foundation to work together. He and I have we're on different sides of the aisle, but we have a friendship, and I'm hoping we can get something done.
You wrote that piece for the New York Times, and
Yeah.
not only did I read what you wrote and watch the video, but I also read the comments that were appended to it.
Yeah.
Many of them were supportive,
Yeah.
but many of them, Meek, said, hey, you're not the right guy to take on this fight.
Do you believe a young black man in America can point a gun at 2 or 3 cops? Because I'm not the only one that get found guilty for these things. Cops charge people with these things at an alarming rate, and people take deals because they don't have lawyer money or they can't afford attorneys to even fight for their freedom. Do you believe that a young black man can lift up a firearm and point a gun at 2, 3 cops while they're attempting to do a bust with their firearms out and not a single shot being fired? That don't even make sense in America. And I never really spoke on that because I never valued myself growing up in a ruthless environment. I seen that happen to many kids, so it was just normal to me. And as I grew up, I always felt embarrassed being around like my Caucasian friends. And I used to always say, like, do you believe I pointed a gun at a cop? Where I come from, like, I'm on a successful path. I got sense. Pointing a gun at a police officer is suicide for a black young man. I never thought about committing suicide in my life, so that's almost like disrespect to me. And I was accused by another black cop, which things I speak on my album Championship, where I talk about self-hate. So I don't know how people could say that they don't think I should be the face of it.
We have a criminal justice system that treats you better if you're rich and guilty than if you're poor and innocent. Donald Trump has flaunted the rule of law for a significant amount of his career and did it in a bullying way, whether it was the exonerated 5, the Central Park 5, even after they were exonerated, failing to acknowledge that it was a travesty of justice. This is a guy who has caused so much damage to our political system. He's really shaken the foundations of our democracy. I'm just one of these folks that came to Washington to focus on criminal justice reform, because we have this nation where we still have people, look, 1 out of every 3 incarcerated women on the planet Earth are in the United States of America. We incarcerate people at levels here that are outrageous. So he to me, is not my central focus. I'm not going to let him tear me away from the important work we need to do in Washington right now.
Are you able to square that with the fact that the judge with whom you've had so many run-ins recently is herself African American?
Yeah, I ain't even blame it on like Caucasian African American. I think it's actually a mindset of actually self-hate. I don't think it's really a thing of a certain color, but it's designed to keep people like myself and the culture I come from. You could be white and come from where I come from and born in these conditions and still get caught up in the same design.
The Senate overwhelmingly passing a major prison and sentence reform bill. The vote 87-12. The bill known as the First Step Act.
A Christmas miracle just happened tonight. As you and I both know, since 1988, when George H.W. Bush put out that Willie Horton ad, both political parties then rushed to build prisons and be tough on crime, and we've been trapped for decades now in this dynamic that you just can't do anything to move in a smarter direction. That nightmare began to come to an end tonight. 87 senators, both political parties came together to do something to try to begin to reduce the number of people behind bars for too long. And what this bill does is unbelievable. It means that 100% of people who are behind bars in the federal system can stay out of trouble and come home a little bit sooner. Half of them can work hard and earn their way home sooner. 100% of the women behind bars can no longer be shackled when they're giving birth and mistreated. 100% of juveniles can no longer be put in solitary confinement. And that horrible crack cocaine disparity where 100 to 1, if you had crack and powder cocaine are the same. You put a little baking soda in it for the hood, it's called crack. Your yacht club with the powder is called cocaine. Of the 100 to 1 that you were sentenced worse with crack, Obama was able to pull that down to 18 to 1, but they wouldn't let him make it retroactive. Tonight, the Senate voted to make it retroactive, which means there are 3,000 people sitting in prison right now who will get to come home soon because they're serving outdated, unfair sentences. Listen, this is like the 1959 Civil Rights Act. People think about, no, 64, 65. No. First, you had 1959, which broke the logjam.
It was the first step.
That was the first step. This is the first step. People go, well, Dan, it doesn't do this, it doesn't do that. It's not called the last step. It's called the first step. We will get to all these other issues, but you had to make it safe. And I'm going to say something that I have to be honest. Donald Trump shocked me and a bunch of people by doing the right thing on this. People thought, because he's, from my point of view, he's been wrong on 99 issues, that he can never be right on one. On this issue, every time people made a prediction that Donald Trump was going to sell us out, turn on us, wasn't going to use political capital, he came harder. And as a result, it is now safe for people in both political parties to speak honestly. We know this prison system is not working. It's wasting money, sending people home bitter and not better. And Donald Trump has got to get the credit. He stood up. Obama did it first. Obama did it first, and now Trump's done it.
But he did have support of many Republicans. There were a few hardliners like Tom Cotton and Mitch McConnell.
And they got crushed like little bugs.
But
as you well know, Jay-Z goes after Kanye on your new album over the whole Make America Great Again business.
Yeah, and I don't think he really goes after Kanye. I think he actually just says, like, don't let them separate us like they did Michael Jackson and Prince, basically. Kanye came out of nowhere and just went red hat, and that was like kind of against everything we represent. I don't know what he represents, but coming up in the hip-hop community, we came up fighting for our rights for a long time, and what that red hat don't really represent what we've been fighting for our whole lives.
We have treated issues of race and poverty, mental health and addiction with locking people up and not lifting them up. And Mr. Vice President has said that since the 1970s, every major crime bill, major and minor, has had his name on it. And sir, those are your words, not mine. And this is one of those instances where the House was set on fire and you claimed responsibility for those laws. And you can't just now come out with a plan to put out that fire. We have got to have far more bold action on criminal justice reform, like having true marijuana justice, which means that we legalize it on a federal level and reinvest the profits in communities that have been disproportionately targeted by marijuana enforcement.
You say the victims' rights are at the forefront of this progressive reform, but when you hear about stories like Kim and Irene Lee and many others that are victimized by reoffenders, it doesn't feel that way.
The news and the media is running a lot of stories about these reoffenders and these folks who have committed violent offenses consistently, but they're not telling the story about the youth who turned their life around. They're not telling the stories about people who went through diversion programs and that they actually work for the roundtable and for the support system that is created around.
Well, are these just acceptable casualties? Is that what you're saying?
I believe that these kinds of incidents are not necessarily, casualties, but they are also not isolated. They are isolated incidents in the context of how they are being promoted and talked about by the news media. And what you don't see is the plethora of success from diversion, from a criminal justice reform perspective.
On January 21st, 1997, I was charged with being an accomplice to a murder. I was convicted, a super predator in the flesh, and sentenced under the accomplice liability doctrine to 2 indeterminate life sentences. We were just kids. Instead of pouring love into us, they just threw us into cages. Everyone forgot that we were just human beings. We just wanted society to accept us with open arms, give us a second chance to bring love and not harm.
Heroes rarely look like me. In fact, I'm what garbage looks like. 12 days before my 20th birthday, I was arrested for my role in a violent robbery attempt in Lower Manhattan while people were sitting in a coffee shop. 4 people were shot, 2 were killed. I was discarded like waste material, and justifiably so to many. I eventually served 10 years, 2 months, and 7 days of a prison sentence. I was sentenced to a decade of punishment in a correctional institution. I was sentenced to irrelevance, the opposite of humanity. The trauma associated with living in a community where guns are easier to get than sneakers, the trauma associated with being raped at the age of 14. Those are reasons for me why making that decision, that fatal decision, was not an unlikely proposition. Criminal justice reform is human justice. Am I not human? When we invest in resources that amplify the relevancy of people in communities like Laventille or parts of Brooklyn or a ghetto near you, we can literally create the communities that we want. We can do better than investing solely in law enforcement as a resource, because they don't give us a sense of relevancy that is at the core of why so many of us do so many harmful things in the pursuit of mattering.
As a police officer and a member of 100 Blacks in law enforcement, we could have safety and justice. They go together. We are going to recognize the progress of the system that reforms our criminal justice system. But we have to be honest about acknowledging how do we go back and make the necessary alterations. We have a relatively small group of people who are recidivists, and they are exploiting these reforms every day. They're making us unsafe. They're taking advantage of a system that does not adequately account for their criminal records. We acknowledge this, and we must adjust to this.
Breaking tonight, a man charged with murder and moments ago facing a judge accused of dismembering a body and then carrying some of the body parts back to his home.
Well, Sandra and Bill, Tuesday, cops found a torso and arms in a Bronx apartment. Yesterday, they found the victim's head and legs inside a freezer in an apartment in Harlem. Today, police arrested the man who lives there. But Johnson says they have the wrong man.
I'm innocent.
Orlando Medina says a tenant called him around 1 a.m.
Someone was pleading for their life. She said she heard 2 gunshots, someone saying, please don't kill me, I got family, something like that, and then 2 more gunshots pretty quickly. Coming in, coming out of the apartment with different articles of clothes, different wigs, you know. So it's weird. Everything was observed by the surveillance cameras. Right. All those things are, those things I saw.
Johnson is an ex-con who today works as a criminal justice reform advocate. Seen here in a Facebook picture he posted with Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg. He served about 25 years behind bars for attempted murder and has a long rap sheet filled with other violent crimes. This is Johnson on Joe Rogan's podcast last month.
I had a wife, I had family still, my son was growing up. He was hearing stories about my so-called notoriety, and I just didn't want to be that dad.
Johnson went on to talk about turning his life around.
Got my GED. I left the gangs alone, which was a benefit for them because, I was what you call an authoritarian. I was a rule guy. I'm still a rule guy. I like rules. I like rules, I like structure.
The courtroom was filled with his supporters at his arraignment tonight, with one wearing a jacket reading, specializing in wrongful conviction cases.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Cutting Through the Culture. We have a very special show for you tonight. First off, let me just say welcome back. We hope that you all had a great Resurrection Sunday last week. We are going to have a great discussion today. We have a special guest for you guys this evening. I have quite a bit mixed feelings. Y'all know me, kind of like the nuance here. I definitely believe that we have a criminal problem in America. But I do have some questions about how we handle it, what are viable options, what is reasonable, and this nature versus nurture kind of thing. Like, is it environment? Is it, those kind of questions? But to get right into this discussion, I'm going to bring up Chad and his guest, Rick Barnes, and let Rick introduce himself and tell a little bit about his background. So I'm going to bring them both up because this is Chad's guest. So let's get right into it.
Hey, can you hear me?
Hello, Mr. Barnes. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing good. Thank you very much.
So, real quick before Mr. Barnes speaks.
Hey, Chad.
Hey, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you sound good.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. So real quick before Mr. Barnes speaks, as far as this whole nature versus nurture, that is, I think, an important conversation to have. However, I believe that it is really up to us as people who care to be involved in the nurturing aspect of it, especially as a church. Whenever we cede the responsibility to the government to come up with programs and to come up with all these kind of schemes to lower recidivism or to try to rehabilitate the individual, I think to the extent that we do that, we only make problems worse. Because how is it that on the one hand, you tell the government that there's supposed to be a separation of church and state, that they're supposed to be secular to the core, and then expect for them to have any kind of part in the rebuilding of the man? We have prisons, we have jails that are in place to, they wield the sword, as the Bible puts it. They're responsible for locking these people up and releasing them to society once their time has been served. There are prison ministries. There are wardens who are working with the private sector to try to bring people in and try to reach these people and to rehabilitate them. But for the state to try to do so by secular means, I don't think is going to work, and it's proven to not work. But it's an important conversation to have. But if one solution is to pass laws that the government might expand itself all the more on the one hand, and to trick people with the false promise of being able to do something about recidivism on the other hand, I think that's a fool's errand. But anyway, that's my little 2 cents, and I know we have a lot of conversation to have, but I wanted to bring in Mr. Rick Barnes because I know that he has a background in law enforcement, and he's a very wise man, one of the wisest men that I've come across on these internet streets, and was definitely interested in hearing his take on this particular subject matter. So if you don't mind, Rick, just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, I appreciate the compliment. Yeah, so as far as law enforcement career, back when dinosaurs kind of roamed the earth, I started as a deep undercover operative. I came from a different family than maybe most might expect, so I was a good fit for the undercover lifestyle, at least I thought. Friends and family thought I went bad, which means my family thought I chose their path. Long story short, supposedly the most successful undercover program as far as its type in the United States. The law enforcement officers didn't know existed till it came out. After that, 15 years standard law enforcement, off and on special operations. Supposedly one of the most successful arrest histories and conviction histories, at least during my time in California, and from what I'm told, most of the Western United States at least. Now, keep in mind, at that time, the only tool I really had was a hammer. And when you only have a hammer, you go after nails. I want you to keep that, kind of peg that thing just for a second. When I was undercover, I recognized there was a different side. I grew up in recognizing there was a different side to the criminal justice problem. My adoptive father, his choice was go into the military or go to jail. He chose the military. Many people I grew up with, at least that were older, had the same choices, and they went one direction or another. The Barnes family in the East Coast, depending on what parts you knew, were recognized as not necessarily being the nicest people in the world. And on my mother's side, as well, we had a reputation of a group that you don't mess with. becoming a law enforcement officer at first was difficult because of that background. After retiring from injuries, fast forward to now, I'm also an assistant pastor of a local church here in Arizona. I work with a prison ministry, prison fellowship, and so I've seen it from both sides. One thing I've noticed for a long time, and a lot of the videos you had in the beginning, I loved them. There was a lot of good points made from both sides. And I think one thing we can all agree, there needs to be reform in the justice system. Bad actions still need repercussions. But at the same time, we have to look at, if we're just treating the symptoms of a problem. So you used to use this example of, let's say one of my children run outside without looking. They run out the door and they trip and they fall and hit the concrete outside and they scrape their knee. Well, I can do a couple different actions. I can just say, okay, pick yourself up and go. And we do that sometimes. I can take a look at the wound and I can clean it out and bandage it so it doesn't get affected. That's also a good thing to do, and tell them to move on and go play. I can also take a look at the reason why they tripped and stumbled in the first place. And some of that comes back to me, and there also has to be some ownership responsibility on the child, depending on their age. Did I tell them, hey, we don't run out the door, there's rocks there, different things, you need to look before you leave? Did we teach them basic things? And did we allow them to begin to explore their environment in a way that was safe, with guidance from parental figures, from figures within the household that gave them good directions? And then when they move forward, do we educate them more? So, and now we also take a look at, okay, let's say I did teach my child this, and maybe he's still resistant or she's still resistant. Do we still allow consequences to a certain degree? And maybe there's a rock that they keep stumbling on because maybe they're partially blind. Well, then I can also remove those obstacles to keep them from stumbling. So there has to be a larger approach. Most of the people that I dealt with in law enforcement, and even in my own life, role models were hard to come by. For me, I chose comic book heroes. I chose people from movie and TV and created this amalgamation of what I thought a man should be, even though it may have been misdirected in certain areas. There was a certain idea that entertainment began to raise me. The TV back in the 70s and 80s began to raise me, but there was still cultural involvement. Now we come to, as society began to advance further and further, we saw that less parents were involved in the rearing of the children. We allowed the school system to raise their children. We allowed the politicians to come up with rules to raise their children and define morality instead of us defining it in the home. We no longer involved ourselves. We began pushing that responsibility out. We look at most of the people that I have in prison that I deal with, and I deal with these guys that have been in there for 20, 30, 40 years even, and ask them about their role models. Most of them tell me they didn't have a constant, stable male role model, or at least positive male role model in their life, whether it be the church or the home. And it has nothing to do with race at this point. This is white, black, Hispanic, run the gamut. If we look at even their mothers, they tell me many of them have a wonderful relationship with their mother, but then I ask them about their mother. Well, the mother sometimes would keep choosing, again, different men and their different fathers wrongly because they were looking for certain attributes. And why would they? And of course, this isn't all women, but gives you an idea of the men that I'm dealing with in jail. So again, we have to look at a couple different issues. So one, there is what the family can do, the community can do. And obviously, being involved in the church as a pastor, I believe what the church has failed to do, but has a responsibility to do. What men have a responsibility to do, and that we have shirked our duty for decades, but also women have allowed us to get away with it. But then I also look at the system itself and how it's broken.
Uh-oh, did we?
There I am.
Is he
Can you
paused?
see me?
Okay.
Oh, I'm back.
Yes, you froze for a second. Okay,
Yeah,
you're
I
back.
saw it. So we look
Okay,
at the
well, just
system.
finish up your thought there, and we'll dig a little deeper in. But we're going to introduce the other two co-hosts
Oh, I'm
as well.
sorry. Just real
Oh
quick.
no, go ahead. You can please finish up your thought. Yeah.
I can be long-winded. I apologize. Comes with age, I think. The system itself is now a warehousing system, and it has been for a long time. We can't expect to put people in a box and keep them in with really no hope, no light, and the only education they really have in there is each other, and expect them to come out more human. If we treat them like animals, we treat them like different aspects. And I'm not saying jail should be soft. You'll never hear me talk about that. But if we have a warehousing system and refuse to address the original core issues about why these people have gone to jail, why they're in jail, then we can't hope that when they come out, they're going to have a better attitude. And then also when they come out in society, supposedly have paid their debt to society, like one of the videos said, they're treated like second-class citizens. And quite honestly, they're treated worse than that. There's a stigma, and sometimes understandably so. But if you've truly served your sentence and your debt to society, then shouldn't you be reintegrated back in society and seen as a new man if we've done our job correctly? And if we haven't, we have to look at about why too. Again, we have to look at not just treating the symptoms, but we have to go to the root cause of the problem. And that was a lot. I'm sorry.
No, that was good.
No, that's okay. Yeah, thank you so much for that. To add to this conversation, let's hear what Blanche has to say about criminal justice reform. Is this a Black issue, Blanche?
I think it's a cap issue. And I say that because criminal justice reform, to me, doesn't have good intent behind it. I don't believe the folks that are pushing it, their end goal is good. I believe that all of this stuff leads to something that's very negative. And so even, for example, somebody going to prison, you can't expect to go to prison and not follow the rules in prison, but expect to be rehabilitated. Oftentimes I see many people go to prison and break the rules in prison. But how can you complain about a system if you don't follow the rules? And to me, we see this stuff happen over and over again. I worked with, what they call at-risk youth, at-risk young adults, programs in the jails and everything. And the one thing I consistently found was that once a person gets okay with bad behavior, once that becomes okay to a person, that is very hard to break out of a person. And the problem is that stuff happens when they're young, whether they see their mother do it, whether they see their father do it, folks in the community. I think about when I was growing up, what I saw around me, a lot of guys were in and out of prison, in and out of jail, gang banging, selling dope. And you get to think about, okay, well, you can say because they didn't have a father, but we still know right from wrong. And I know these social pressures are very hard, but there are folks that, because most people don't take that route. Even as bad as we say the community is and the hood and the ghetto is, most people don't go to prison, and most folks don't go to jail, and most folks don't do crime. So there's a clear separation in the population from the majority folks following the rules, and this small segment not. Now that small segment, we got to be honest and say some of those people are just going to do what they're going to do. I do believe that folks can be rehabilitated. I do, but I also know that the folks pushing this criminal justice reform, I got to really measure their intent, because to me, what I'm seeing is a bunch of criminal talk, but they never ever get on here and talk about the victims. All these folks running their mouth and they never ever talk about the victims. I'm like, people saying, I'm treated like an animal. Man, you killed 2 people. I'm treated like an animal. I just listen. Y'all are murdering people. People are losing their lives. Now think about this. Now, you kill somebody, that's affecting if they have children. That's affecting their loved ones. We're talking about generational trauma off of one murder of one person. And so to make light of, I did this, like it was, you brush that off and then say, I need to be, no, that's not how that works. And again, murder is wrong. We all know this stuff is wrong, but the media is telling us when a Black person does crime, somehow there's some virtue attached to it. Somehow, some way they did it because the elements, the system, everything was against him. And I just call cap. And I call cap because I grew up in the environment. immediate, my father, I've seen the darkest side of it. And so bullets hitting the house, all the stories you want to hear, I was there. And at the end of the day, these people knew right from wrong. When you sit down and talk with them, their motivation wasn't making the community better. Their motivation wasn't making sure I was, had a good role model. Their motivation oftentimes was money, was lifestyle, was prestige, was a name for themselves. It was all these other things, and it wasn't noble and wasn't honorable. And again, I don't want to sound like I'm not saying the criminal justice reform is not a good thing. I'm just saying I question the intent behind it.
Mm-hmm.
And where did you grow up, Blanche?
Sacramento, California. Sacramento. I grew up in the P. Folks, y'all listen, they know where it is, but Sacramento, California.
And Rick, you're from what part of California?
Well, I was originally raised in the East Coast, but did Southern California. So San Bernardino County, Redlands, San Bernardino, Victorville, Riverside.
Okay. All right. So 2 Californians in the house. Okay. So let's get our into. What's that?
No, I think he's like Tupac, went from the East Coast to the West Coast.
Yeah, for.
That's right. Never mind. We'll behave ourselves. We have guests tonight.
Listen, there's no reason to. And listen, I appreciate honesty. And look, I'm not a wallflower or a snowflake. So everything I've heard from you guys in the past, and I do listen to a lot of you guys and everything else, and I consider you guys and the people that Chad has kind of surrounded himself with as being very sage. I hear a lot of the wisdom from some of you guys, and it's just like, especially for your age and different things, I'm like, man, that is solid. And I direct a lot of people to you guys. So keep in mind, no, it's true. It's a rare thing. I meet so many people who lack the ability to be introspective, who lack the ability to have the proper perspective and step back and take a look at what's really going on. And you guys really do try and do that. So no, honesty, being upfront, and by the way, humor is a blessed thing. So please don't shy away. And if any of your audience is hurt by that, well, they need to grow a big pair of pants and deal with that.
No, our audience is good. They know how we roll. But to get our other co-host up and to get his first initial thoughts on the criminal justice, let's bring in Mr. Chuck Littleton.
What's happening? Can you hear me? How you doing? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. What are your thoughts? Is criminal justice a Black issue?
Well, of course, they try to play it up in this way, because, of course, statistically speaking, Black males, particularly between the ages of 15 and 35, are far more likely to commit a violent crime. And of course, I hear people right now trying to find ways to dissect and interpret and break the data down to try and dispel this notion. But of course, the market would tell us otherwise. And what I mean by the market, I'm talking about human beings in the real world who have real skin in the game. People will tell you what they value based upon how they move in the world, right? And when I say the market, of course, when people hear terms like market, they think economics, and rightfully so. But I don't necessarily mean sort of market in an economic sense in this regard. But one thing that I guess prices do when you're talking about a market, prices aren't simply the numbers on a tag on something that you go to the store and purchase. As Friedrich von Hayek once said, that prices coordinates knowledge. And that's what prices do. Prices coordinate knowledge. And and what I mean by this, of course, this is reflected in one example in terms of land and housing values and so on and so forth. And so it isn't, I guess it isn't so much a Black issue because, of course, the prevalence of crime affects us all. I mean, strictly to the point of your question. But again, they want to try and racialize it because that's what political demagogues do. The mass of people have become the playthings of ideologues, and there is no more a diabolical example than this whole issue of quote unquote criminal justice reform. Ever since I guess you could call it the second iteration of the progressive movement in the 1960s, was when you really began to see this, I guess, shift, if you will, in what became the focus of the law. This criminal justice reform. These are notions, these are saying, phrases, terms, and attitudes that first became popular in the early 1960s, and it is no coincidence that we've seen this spike in violent crime over a 10-year period from the mid 1960s to the mid 1970s, which culminated, of course, with the 1994 quote unquote crime bill, which we may get to at some point. But again, the proof is in the wording. The proof is in the title, criminal justice. What does that mean exactly? It means exactly what it would intimate on its surface. It is justice for the criminal. We have an entire legal apparatus filled with left-wing ideologues that think that the entire legal apparatus is their domain by which they can exercise their own subjective perceptions of what they think social justice means, or what they think, quote unquote, cosmic justice means. So therein lies the problem, is that we have a system that now primarily advocates on behalf of the prisoner, because the goal, of course, of the law is to rehabilitate and to prevent and to do all these things. Like Quisha posed the question earlier, is this nature or is this nurture? Well, when Quisha was saying that, I made it a point to write down here that what Quisha is stating, or the question that she is posing, is outside the realm of the law, which is what Chad alluded to. Far be it for me to try and communicate here and now the brilliance of Oliver Wendell Holmes. But he once said that, of course, that when you're talking about justice, justice is a kind of personal. It is a one-on-one. It is an interactive thing, and the will of the people, if you will, is expressed through the legislature, not the judicial. The point of the law is not to create the law, but simply to interpret the law. The law in and of itself is not about justice. The law is about procedure and protocol. But the point of law is not to implement justice anyway, regardless if you're talking about justice or criminal justice and so on and so forth. Laws can be either good or bad, but it's left up to the individuals through their legislators, through the legislative, their elected representatives, to create these laws, and then the judiciary goes on from there to interpret the law as it is carved out by the legislative branch of government. And so the law, and certainly the state, is incapable of dealing with this issue of poor behavior. It doesn't work that way. By the time you reach the quote unquote criminal justice system, you've reached the end of the line. Something else has gone wrong long before that. And this whole notion of this question of criminal justice reform, I mean, surely I am in favor of criminal justice reform, but I can guarantee you that the majority of the people who use that term don't mean what I mean when I say criminal justice reform. There needs to be an increase in a lot of the, anyway, I won't get into the particulars as far as my attitudes and opinions in terms of how to improve upon the quote unquote criminal justice system, but it surely doesn't incorporate this kind of cavalier, lax attitude towards prisoners. I think it was the 1964 Supreme Court decision of Escobedo versus Illinois. And if you all aren't familiar with the story of Danny Escobedo, just go and look up that famous case of Danny Escobedo. It goes into the whole question of recidivism and these sorts of things. But again, when you're talking about the complexity of human nature, human beings and their various motivations and wills and and wants and ambitions and so on and so forth. You're dealing with things that no one person or one group of individual could just neatly package and encapsulate in such a neat and formulaic way, so as to solve the issue of quote unquote mass incarceration. I think a large part of the reason why we have mass incarceration in the United States, as these activists like to go on and on about, is because of the fact that we have various, appellates and judicial reviews and so on and so forth. You have people coming behind, second guessing the defense strategies of these various individuals who were accused of various crimes. They've been granted new trials, and just goes on and on and on. The legal system just drags itself out, and drags itself out. Because again, you have ideologues looking for little technicalities and little missteps, so as to completely upend the entire legal process. For example, with the Central Park Five, he likes to say that they were exonerated. They weren't exonerated. They had their sentences vacated, but those men were not innocent. Men like Danny Escobedo, men, of course, they like to hide behind their whole activist bona fides and try to turn this into a political issue. I am, of course, reminded of the slew of murders that were committed by members of the Black Panther Party. The leader of the LA chapter of the Black Panther Party, Geronimo Pratt, who was defended by Johnny Cochran, was finally released after serving almost 3 decades in prison in the late 1990s. All of these things, all of these beliefs, all of these notions about the criminal is just being given a bad rap. It's just not true. It's just not true. It's insane. And I'll leave it off here and go back to Oliver Wendell Holmes when he says that the law is created by way of human experience, not logic, and it certainly isn't dictated by what we believe to be what is morally preferable or ideal. Law is based upon experience. And of course, Rick, nobody would know more on this panel about that than Rick. But human experience tells us something about criminals that these ideologues and politicians could never tell us. And I trust the wisdom of the collective body of citizens more so than I do a political demagogue, whether they be a community organizer or someone in the halls of Congress. And that's my take on it.
Sorry about the lighting. I'm trying to get that situated, but I noticed it's off. I'm a lot darker than usual. So
that's racist.
Quisha's computer is lagging, so she had to hop out. Looks like she's back actually. But
I'm a lot whiter than usual, so it works out together.
Yeah, balances out.
That's privilege.
There you go.
What I missed? Sorry, my computer was acting crazy.
Chuck was just educating everybody. You missed it, so you got to go back and get your GED. So the one of the things that struck me about a lot of what was being said in the montage is you had these guys who was talking a lot about, to use Quisha's word, nurture, and the environments in which they grew up. And I think a lot of people are inclined to believe them, especially those of us who didn't grow up in such harsh environments. But then you have Blanche come on the other side of it and say, like, I grew up in those environments too. And I'm not buying it. And so there's obviously, I think more so than one's environment, what really matters is what goes on inside one's household, and even still what goes on inside one's mind. Because I know people personally who grew up in single mother households whose mothers were drug addicts and were very dependent on the state. And these individuals, these young men, turned out to be upstanding citizens who've never committed a crime, never clutched a gun or anything of that nature. So these things are really a kind of case by case thing. But what you see, to Chuck's point, and I don't want to take away from how eloquently he delivered it, but what these things tend to do is to so sensationalize and so politicize the matter. And it really is this whole thing of criminal justice reform, a thing of pulling on people's heartstrings in order to usher in a political agenda that is really a quest toward a Marxian utopia that really will work to the detriment of everyone. And so for some people, I mean, I really have to listen to, okay, what do you mean when you say criminal justice reform? Like, what is it that you're getting at? What is it that you wish to see happen? There's a lot of Ivy League professors and lower level, college professors whose idea of criminal justice reform is literally shutting down the prisons. And they use such language as we can't throw people and lock people in cages because that's inhumane, regardless of the crime. There's one professor who says that his idea of genuine justice is bringing the alleged criminal face to face with his victim, or if the victim is dead, the families of the victim, and having them work it out together to figure out what the solution is going to be. And that is his idea of criminal justice, and get rid of all the prisons. We shouldn't be locking people up. And so they come up with these crazy and wacky ideas. And very rarely, just speaking for myself, have I come across somebody who claims to be an advocate for criminal justice reform and is advocating for something that is going back to the edicts of the Constitution and something that's really rooted in constitutional justice. Very rarely have I come across such a person. Most of these people, to Chuck's point, are using criminal justice reform in that kind of rhetoric as a veneer to, in a sense, veil what their real intentions are, which is to move toward a more Marxian society. So anyway, I'll give it back to you.
It's funny that you say that, because that's exactly what they do with this restorative justice that was implemented by Barack Obama. So in schools, instead of having, kids who are being disruptive and causing all types of problems, some of them literally committing felonies in the classroom, they are not sending them to the principal's office. They are not disciplining the child at all. They are taking the child and sitting him or her down with the person that they have assaulted in some cases, or wherever the conflict is, making them come together and try to work out their problems that way. There is a thing as conflict resolution, where you would sit down and try to discuss it, but that's not when somebody's throwing a chair at you. Okay, you know what I mean? Like, that is not for that, and that person still has to be. There has to be consequences, otherwise they won't change their behavior. But they're already doing that. They're trying to make that I think they are trying to, let's start it in the classroom. And Rick, you mentioned about education and schools and stuff like that, which I talk a lot about that. But they're trying to start it in the classroom, I think, to sort of like a test ground to then grow it out and then see, look, we've been doing all these great things under the name of restorative justice. Now let's not have prisons, and let's just do this in the broader society. I think it's nonsense. We're seeing more crime in classes. We're seeing more crime. We're seeing more violence in classes. This is not working, and it's targeted to, quote unquote, the Blanche, the underserved kids,
underserved, at risk, at promise.
And most of them are Black, who are doing these things in the schools. So it's just It's crazy that they're already, that Chad said that they're trying to get them to get together, to put them together, and so we can get rid of prisons. But Rick, so you did say in your opening that you do believe that criminal justice reform is needed. Where would you see the most need for that? Like, where would that be? And what would you think that reform should be?
I think one of you guys mentioned it. It just can't be a kind of a one direction approach. It has to be kind of a multi-pronged attack on this thing. So I'm a firm believer that the prison should not be a place that you ever want to go to, and you should ever want to go back to, first and foremost. Sometimes and by the way, if you guys see me, my eyes water, and I have really, really interesting specialized contacts that sometimes give me a hard time. And right now they are beating the crap out of me. So I apologize.
Yeah, you look high, Rick. You're looking high.
Oh, I wish that was the case. It's not. So
you gonna fit right on there. Go ahead.
So really, so it has to be approached from different things. Yes, I'm a firm believer that for hard crimes, there needs to be hard sentences. But at the same time, from the justice system, we can't approach everything with the same. And we can't expect people that we're going to put in there for 10, 15, 1, 2, 3 years in the same pods, in the same areas with people that these are their hardcore criminals that are going to teach them how to walk. So one of the prisons that I work with right now is up here in Maricopa County in Arizona. And one of the big difficulties, even talking with one of the lieutenants of the group, he explains to me, because it used to be that you could count on the OGs to run the yard. They kept it under control. They had certain morality, certain things you did not do, certain assaults that never really would occur because there were rules. And the guards also understood those rules as well. And they worked, because keep in mind, you have only so many guards and you can't control thousands of inmates. It has to be this cooperative measure where everybody understands what the rules are and they all play within this game. Now, I've got some arguments with some of that as well, but let's take that aspect just for a minute. So a decade ago, it used to be that if you were young and you go in the prisons, there were some rules. All right. So an older guy would come up to you and say, look, 2 ways you can play this. You can do your time, keep your head down. You're going to be good. You stay out of the mess. Don't step up. You're going to be fine. They will leave you alone. Yes, they're going to make sure you're going to defend yourself, but they're not going to sit there and do like you see in the prison movies and everything else. It doesn't happen like that. But if you step in and you want to play the game, be prepared to bring it. There's a big difference. So if you're not just there to do your time and you want to do X, Y, and Z, keep in mind there's going to be consequences. They would be warned this. And then when those consequences begin to occur, the guards would also tell them, look, these are how it goes. And you do you. Now, even before that, so we could argue that at least kept some control in the yard. Now, control in the yard is done by a lot of different ways, but at least there was some education in that aspect where people knew to mind the rules. A lot of guys, when they got out of prison years ago, they at least were respectful to a certain degree. They learned certain manners and rules and how to behave in certain ways. Doesn't mean they didn't necessarily recidivize, but we do recognize there were some issues, but they at least came out a different way. Now we've got these young men that go in the prison, and the same OGs are no longer able to control them or cap them like they would in society and say, look, man, you're running amok. We're going to put you in check. And the guards also, their hands are tied too, because they used to be able to listen. If you're sitting there running amok in this pod because of what you're doing, there's going to be discipline and it's going to be rough. Now they can't do that too. And there's a lot of reasons for that, both good and bad. So we've seen a societal breakdown in the prisons. Prisons are actually more chaotic, in my my humble opinion, sometimes not so humble, even more dangerous in certain aspects than it was just a few years ago. And it's getting worse and worse. But the same goes in the streets. The adult men who were running the families, who were running the streets to a certain degree, there were rules. And they held it. They held the young ones accountable. Whether we agreed with those rules or not, they still kept some kind of cap or control in society.
Is that still today? Like, are those OGs still kind of making the rules? No. I'm with Glad shaking his head. Like,
yeah,
you don't even see that like on the block anymore. Like there's no like rules even to like on the streets.
And I'm going to blame people like myself on that aspect. So before,
why? Because you're white?
No. So I may blame myself as far as why they sell so much. What is it? Sunblock in different stores. That would be about it. The idea is no. So in the early 90s, we made this huge push to begin taking the shot callers off the streets. We began taking OGs. And I was one of the guys that was fore and front. You guys were on my hit list. We went down. You were taken off the streets. You were put in jail for a very long time. And then what happened? We created a vacuum.
Wow. I have to commend you for being upfront and honest, like, hey, to look back and say, you know what, I did something and that wasn't the right thing to do. Many people aren't willing to do that, but I understand exactly what you're saying. I want to get Blanche's take on this. Blanche, what do you think about this removing of the OGs? And you grew up in the streets.
Well, yeah, I mean, what Rick was doing, I think the intent behind it was, you get rid of the big fish, and then the smaller fish just dissipate, and they kind of, lose direction and don't want to actually take over the empire. But I think what happens is once you get rid of these OGs, now you just have a whole bunch of fractured young men running around creating new gangs, and it's just all kind of chaotic and stuff. So I understand it makes sense to get rid of the OGs, but in the long term, I just think that to fix it was going to have to be like he's doing, where he's going into the prisons and speaking the word of God. And I think Chad alluded to this earlier as well. But what I see and what I saw when I was even working with these young men is that I was at a school where we had all the children from around Atlanta, all the ones that got put out of school or were in jail and got sent home, all in one school. And so you would be amazed at how they were all formed like so many different gangs and cliques, even in the schools. Like it was just like neighborhood beat. It was crazy. But I mean, the school managed until they tried to burn it down. It just was. But anyway, but my point is, you see the craziness with no guidance, and you got to think that back then, if a guy was 16, his OG was what, 25? You know what I'm saying? Like the OGs aren't really like OGs. They're like older versions of the young guys. And so I don't know. I think it made sense what Rick and them were doing to get rid of the big fish. But I just think that, let me say this too. I don't think that the music and the culture helps. Maybe it would have worked if they could turn the radio on or buy a CD and they wasn't glorifying the street light. They wasn't glorifying the violence. They wasn't doing all that stuff. So I think maybe that kind of had these young children impressionable to even try to be like, I remember back in the day, it used to be Scarface. Then it went from Scarface to the, then it was NWA came out. Then it was the movies that came out. So it was just a lot of influence for these young folks to be a part of or be in a gang or be in the streets. And so I don't know. I got to put some blame on the culture and the music entertainment as well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, go ahead, Chuck.
What you got, Quisha? Okay, I'm going back to something that you said earlier. We talked about the school system, and we hear all this talk, these phrases such as the school to prison pipeline, right, and all this other garbage. And Chad was, of course, mentioning earlier this whole talk of abolishing prisons and so on, and this is right in line with the Marxian worldview, which suggests, of course, that something, for example, like our legal system or our criminal justice system, of course, runs downstream from our economic system. And the entire point of the prison structure in the first place is to, of course, to protect the property owning class, because the whole of the issue with regard to this discussion surrounding prisons and mass incarceration and all these other things is simply the existing of the principle of property ownership, because the legal system exists such as it does for the purpose of protecting the haves from the have-nots. This is why these people, when it comes to criminal, this is why they always mention things like, well, their upbringing and they were poor and this and that. You heard in the opening when Meek Mill was talking about, I think he said something about the curse of intergenerational poverty. Was that Meek Mills or someone else? And I wrote down when he said that, I said, well, if it's a curse, I wonder who cast the spell. Who exactly did that? What is that? This curse that you speak about? But yes, this is these whole people. This these folks' attitude, because everything, when it comes to the material world and how we, organize the sort of allocation of finite resources. This whole thing that we call an economy, everything that exists from religion, art, culture, law. All of those things are what Friedrich Engels would refer to as ideological overgrowth, because everything sort of begins with man's base and his primary need which is to fill his belly. And this is why these people say these cockamamie things. Even Dr. Thomas Sowell talks about, I think, in Intellectuals and Society, about how, these people, when they talk about prisons being overcrowded, Rick made a point to talk about, separating the, petty criminals from the hardened criminals. And all we hear about is how much our prisons are overcrowded. But I wonder if these very same prison reformers would be in favor of building more prisons so as to give individual prisoners more space while they are paying back their debt to society so that they can be kept safer. Anyway, it's just a thought. But this whole thing about, creating this vacuum when it comes to the OGs, especially in the early 1990s, and I know I'm probably going to sound like a tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist when I say what I am about to say, but the fact of the matter, I know Rick wants to chime in, so this is my last point. The problem is the fact that there is a gang in and of itself. Therein lies the problem. And this is why I think that our authorities have been very weary of what has been going on the street level, because the gangs represent, and this goes all the way back to the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, and the creation of this pathological, dysfunctional Black culture, as we call it today, because the Black criminal class represents, in the minds of the left-wing ideologue, the quote-unquote lumpen proletariat. And this is why the Black Panther Party in the early 1960s recruited gang members into their ranks. See, when you had the Bloods and Crips truce in the early 90s, you had in the late 80s, this was shortly during the time or during the period when Huey P. Newton was murdered, and I think it was 1989. And then this was, shortly before, Rodney King and everything else. You had the Blood Crip truce in California and these things. Then you even had decades prior, you had the Black Panther Party making connections with the Black Stone Rangers in Chicago, with Fred Hampton, and later on Bobby Rush, and so on and so forth. But the problem was that many of these gangs were being politically radicalized. And I know I'm probably shifting the goal, shifting the conversation a bit. We may not want to go here, but gangs such as the Bloods and the Crips, in the same vein as the Black Panthers, especially if you read the autobiography of Sayinka Shakur, aka Monster Cody. Many of you who are familiar with gang culture and gang life have heard the name Monster Cody. Monster Cody was politically radicalized while in prison, and according to his own description, or description of his own life, he had become, whilst in prison, a quote-unquote revolutionary socialist. So therein lies the problem with the existence of gang culture in and of itself, because these people are the types of individuals that are prime, if you will, for this kind of political radicalism that can, turn them into these modern day American Bolsheviks, because they are already well organized together, and they're already collective and willing to die for one another and to do all these things. And so therein lies the problem. The existence of the gang in the first place.
I'm sorry. I was, go ahead, Rick.
No, I'm done. I'm sorry. I'm done.
Before I start what I was going to say, man, if you ever taught a class somewhere nearby, I would totally take your class. You rock, man.
Thanks, Rick.
I wish most people just part of what you heard was deep, and it can go so many levels and so true. And I'm going to support your point as far as the ultimate goal here. And this may, again, cause the goalposts to get moved a little bit differently, like you suggested. So in the early 2000s, I recognized, as my career got larger, I'm still first pushing on stats, more arrests, doing these different things, getting these quote unquote awards or whatever you want to say. And I realized there's a problem, that all I'm doing is putting out fires, and more fires keep happening. I'm getting the same people, the revolving door, the same families. I'm creating enemies. And even from children as they're growing up. I remember, before I get into this next part, I arrested this young man for beating his girlfriend or wife. I can't remember which it was. It's been years. It really beat her horribly. And as I'm dragging him out, because he wanted to fight, it didn't go so well for him. And as I'm dragging him out to take him where he needs to go, a little 5 or 6 year old comes out, and he runs up to me, and I think he's going to say thank you for protecting his mama, because he was there watching the whole fight go down. And he said, man, when I get older, I'm going to kill you. And it shocked me. And the man that I'm holding as I'm dragging, he goes, yeah, I'm raising him right. And again, that response didn't get taken very kindly by me, and he went to where he ended up going. But so here's the issue. So I decided, okay, we need to do something to bring policing back to the community. And I began investing off duty in the community policing. I created my own station, got other officers involved, and we created an entire community policing program. Once the department decided, hey, we're actually having an effect. In fact, here's a good example. Within 1 year, crime dropped over 70% in the area. And it wasn't from heavy-handed tactics, not to say that we didn't put people into place when they stepped up. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is I went to different communities. I went to different areas and said, look, here's how it's going to go. We're going to do something different. This is your community. This is my community. This is where we live. You want jobs, you need education, you need extra finances, you're having problems with getting medicine for your family, whatever it might be. I've got resources. I will find those resources with you. Work with me. I will find you jobs. If you want to prosper, it'll be my job to help you. But if you don't, and you want to damage this community, I will take you out of this community. And it began to push. So then crime dropped over 70% that first year. The second year, the department says, oh, this is really working. So then we had a continued drop, another 35%, which is still huge over a 2-year period. And the drop continued. And of course, it's less and less as society begins to get caught up and people start playing by the rules. Crime dropped dramatically throughout the entire city. And then we began taking it to other departments and other agencies. And we began pushing that community policing ideal, and the different books and different things and texts that we wrote went on further and had a huge marked difference. But then something came. Elections came. And what I got told point blank by some of my office was right next to a congressman's office. He said, I need you to understand something. When crime is low, people don't pay. When crime is high, they're willing to vote raises. And so that was one of my first real collisions with the politics of, and again, putting air quotes around it, which I hate to do, but I do so often, is the politics of the criminal justice system. It is monetarily based. We know what it takes to curtail narcotic use and drug abuse and prostitution. We know what it takes to begin controlling the gangs. We know how to stop it. People like me, people like you, we know exactly where it starts. We know how to control it. We also know there's a portion of society, like I can't remember if it was which one of you guys mentioned it, but it's so true. There's a portion of the society that will always do crime. And I've mentioned it to Chad before, and maybe to you, sir, where it's a 10-80-10 rule. And if you're not familiar with it, I'll revisit it. So 10% of the people in this world, they're your do-gooders. They're the ones that typically are going to do the right thing when nobody's looking. 10% of people in this world, they're your do-badders. They're always going to do the wrong thing when everybody's looking. And then 80% are opportunists that'll do the wrong thing when they know they can get away with it. And so we recognize there's a portion of society that I'm not going to be able to change. They have made a decision. They're set in their ways, no matter where they came from, rich, poor, white, black, doesn't matter. No matter what music they have, no matter what church they went to, no matter how godly they were raised or ungodly, it doesn't matter. 10% of either side, they're going to move a certain direction. That is human nature. But also human nature is opportunism. So what community policing did is we began taking the opportunity of away and giving off of the carrot and the stick. It's your choice. And when given a choice, the 80% would rather avoid the pain, because they know they're going to get caught. They don't like it.
Right.
And that means you got 90% of a population that's going along with the program. You have 10% that still have to be met with direct force. But because it doesn't get votes in the end, because it doesn't get money for the chiefs, the sheriffs, if it doesn't get us new units, it doesn't get us new offices. People don't vote when things are going really good. They're like, well, crime is low. I feel safe. Why do the police departments need a raise? Why do they need new cars? Why do these agencies need new buildings? Why do we need new jails? But because of it, they're like, well, I'm not going to vote for those things. So what happens? We're not ordered to stand down, and then you start seeing problems like you're having now. These programs, we've seen these programs cycle, these community type policing programs started all the way back in the beginning of modern law enforcement with Sir Robert Peel. Community policing. The police are the people and the people are the police. And you have your people involved, the community involved, where they recognize it's not us against them, it's us, all of us in the same boat, moving towards a direction that is ethically and morally solid. But that doesn't get you votes.
Right. Man, that's I mean, that's like a whole that's a whole show in itself.
No, I mean,
Yeah.
and Rick is right in how soon people forget, by the late 90s, early 2000s. I mean, so many people, and I had a conversation with Chad about this the day prior, yesterday, and, I made it a point to remind him, not that Chad needs to be reminded of anything, but, I was talking about this, the 70s and the 80s. I mean, when you talk about a place like New York City, I mean, the fictional Gotham City, of course, from DC Comics, Batman, everyone knows, was kind of modeled after New York City. And I mean, for those of us who are forgetful and don't remember and don't recall, for example, I mean, New York City during the 70s and 80s, some years, I mean, they saw upwards of, 2,000 plus murders, per year in New York City. I mean, and it wasn't just an issue with New York City, but it was the entire country. How soon we forget. And once the early 90s kind of kicked in, that's when everyone, I guess, bipartisan said, okay, enough is enough. This has been going on for far too many decades. Something has to be done. And like I said, to Rick's point, once measures were taken and then crime decreased, and then that's when you talk about void, you talk about vacuums, you had opportunists kind of step in and they began to say, well, wait a minute, look at the incarceration numbers, right, in comparison to rates of crime. And so why do we have such, and this is how idiotic these people are. They don't even realize the stupidity in what they're saying. They're looking at the lack of crime and comparing it to the rate of incarceration, and to them that's a problem, because there shouldn't be such incarceration when we don't have as much crime. And Rick just kind of just laying it out there from his personal and his wisdom and his firsthand experience. But I mentioned Thomas Sowell earlier, and I think this is in the same book, Intellectuals and Society, where Thomas Sowell points out this irony that the political class don't seem to see the correlation between quote unquote mass incarceration and lower rates of crime. Perhaps the reason why crime rates dropped significantly from the 90s into the early 2000s was because of these measures that were undertaken that led to quote unquote mass incarceration. And so there you have it. You have mass incarceration, you have lower crime. You lower the rate of incarceration, it increases crime. The reason why there isn't as much crime on the streets is because those who would otherwise be committing these crimes
Are locked up.
are now in the penitentiary.
The only area I would disagree with you at all, sir. The only area is you said.
No, Phil, go ahead, do your thing.
The only area is, these politicians don't necessarily see, and of course I'm going to horribly paraphrase it, the truth of the situation. They do. Because I remember when this came down, I'm like, no, we've done these things. Look at the difference in community. Look at the parks. Kids can play in the park. The drug use has gone down. The high schools are doing better. The schools are doing better. Communities are coming together. This is what we want. I want to work myself out of a job. They said, you've done a wonderful job. This is what you're supposed to do. Now, what assignment you want to go to? Anywhere you want to go, just go away. They know it works, and we have documentation. See, here's the thing. This is by design. Where we're at today, I knew years ago. So let's go back to the 90s when I started watching a shift in who they were hiring in law enforcement.
I agree with that, by the way, Rick. I agree with that. Go ahead.
So when they hired me, the big question was, I'm not the biggest guy in the world, but the chief was Chief Brickley was a unique individual. He looked like a Colonel Sanders on steroids, this big old Marine. And he said, hey, you're going to enter in a very dangerous world. I was told you can fight. I want to know that somebody your size isn't afraid. It's not going to respond in fear. Tell me about your fights. Tell me about where you come from. He knew that I'd fractured some laws. I came from families that really, weren't all criminals, but a lot of definite criminality ran in my family. We were well known for that. I've got sisters and brothers that have never seen the outside of different birthdays for decades.
Wow.
But So when they looked for people that weren't afraid, they looked for people that believed in God and country, that stood on something, that were willing to die for those things. When I joined in law enforcement, I never asked how much was I making. I never asked once about the benefits. When I was undercover, I made what a trainee made because there was a screw up in payroll. I didn't care. I knew and believed what I was doing, and all throughout the streets, and even the advancement of my career and moving forward. But now they started hiring people with no real life experience. They purposely looked for people. They used to look for people that came from places where I came from, maybe where some of you guys came from, depending on some of the things I've heard from you guys. They looked for that because they recognize if you saw the nature of the underbelly of society and you turned away from that, and you were able to build yourself away from that and stand up against that, then you're not going to turn wrong. You're not going to go quote unquote bad when you're faced with it in the street in uniform. Instead, we started turning towards people that with no life experience.
That's
grew
right.
up with a silver spoon in their mouth, that had never been in a fight, that never knew what it was like to wait in welfare lines, that never knew what it was like to be hated just because they were in the wrong neighborhood, the wrong place, whatever it was, that they grew up in these these perfect homes, so to speak. And then you put them on the street, they're afraid. And that fear, because they're afraid to get, and I've been hit more times than I can remember because a lot of concussions, I forgot a lot of things. But the idea is, yeah, I'm not afraid. I'll do what
I have a
needs to get
question for
done.
you, Rick.
Yeah.
So earlier you were talking about the strategy back in the 90s being to go after the OG, the shot callers. And you see this even represented in a lot of film, television, and media. I think of the show The Wire, where they try to get to the top of the totem pole. You make a good point as far as the vacuum that creates when you get rid of the big fish. But my question is, what is the alternative? Because if the shot caller is involved in decadence and providing the very fear that the 80% that you mentioned have, where they're afraid of being accosted or bullets flying through their windows or what have you. I understand that the OG supposedly is supposed to try to keep all that to a low, where you have a kind of organized crime kind of situation. However, what's the alternative? Do you try to talk to the OG to try to get them to redirect their enterprise? Like what is the solution if not locking these people up? I mean,
I'm gonna
because I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm not gonna speak very politically correct. I don't do that. I don't agree with it. So I'll tell you what I did in different levels, and I'll tell you its effects. So maybe to answer what the solution really is. So when community policing, I sat down with the OGs in different areas in the neighborhood. I said, look, man, you're too smart. Let's say, Chad, you're an OG of whatever neighborhood or in whatever street. I come to you, I said, I'd come knock on your door, bring you pizza. Hey, my name's Officer Barnes. We're going to have a conversation. Thank you for inviting me for dinner. And I walked in and sat down, and sat the pizza. Before you figured out what happened, I've got pizza. Let's sit down. Let's break bread. In my culture, breaking bread, this is how we deal. I tell them, I want to make a deal with you. See, I know you're too smart. You're too good. You're too strong. You know how to run these streets better than I can ever possibly get it. I can't get you. You know that. But what I can do is your sister, when she's cheating on welfare or going and taking from a store or driving a car without license, I can go after her. Your brother, who I know has been dealing with prostitutes on the other side, who maybe has some issues, he ain't going to do well in jail. I'm going to go after him. Your mother, who I know that she's doing X, Y, and Z, and I'll go after them. I say, I can't get you. You're too smart. But I'll go after everybody you're surrounded by until you beg me to stop. Then people test you. So you have to put your money where your mouth is. And you begin going after them. Then when they come, police, what do I need to get to you stop? I said, no, man, it doesn't work like that. I told you what I would do. I keep my promises. I deal with you as a man will. You keep your promises. And I let it go on for a little bit till they begged me and they asked me, what do I need to do to get you to stop? Please take me to jail. Stop. All you have to do is play ball. Help me protect your community. Don't do your crap in my city, our community. Help me protect those schools, and I will back you up. You do that a few times, the city begins coming in line. Now, that sounds rough. Now, let's go back to what I did as far as later on in my career, where I worked major narcotics and anti-terrorism. The same idea is similar. We would actually see who the OGs were. We didn't go after them right away. We would begin seeing everybody they communicate with, everybody on the lower level, and we begin taking them off. We slowly pick off the fringes. We begin to isolate them slowly. And everybody that they're attached to begins to slowly gets taken down because of different things they're doing. We let the OGs run for a little bit because they think they're running the show. And in the time, they realize their whole organization has been taken apart from the ground up. If we take the foundation out, that's a smarter way to do it. I know this sounds cold. I know this sounds melodramatic or whatever the words might be. But if you are able to take their ability away to do business, if you're able to take the heart of the business out, then the head dies off. You see, the big mistake we had in the beginning is cutting the head off. We thought cutting the head off that organism, it would just grow another one. Instead, I let that for last. So when I take you down, I've taken everybody down in your organization. I've got more than evidence to lock you away forever if necessary. And you've had several warnings. You've had people knocking your door. This is what's going on. And now you become a pariah. Nobody wants to do business with you. So that's part of the solution, and it does work. But then there's a secondary thing. As we're doing that, we need to have real education about what drugs really do. So you're going to hear me talking to both sides of my mouth. And I've worked a lot of defense cases afterwards, and I've said this a lot. I also worked defense after retired, had my own companies. So I am somebody that believes in, this is going to sound horrible and people are going to jump on it, in legalization of drugs to a certain degree, but not without proper education. If you're driving with it, if you're under the influence, you commit a crime with it, it's no excuse. We need to tell you and show you what it really does medically, not let the government just peddle what they want to tell you. Like a good example, marijuana. Marijuana has some benefits. It has a lot of negatives. It does a lot of things to you genetically. It has cancer, carcinogens. Is it the worst thing out there? No. Is it the best thing out there? Certainly not. But if I, just like smoking, if I can educate you away from those different things and have you clear-headed and understand so you can make a choice to do or not to do, to smoke a cigar or not smoke a cigar, that's on you. And understand you're responsible for you're responsible for your actions, and you intelligently, knowingly are making these choices, you're going to find less and less people make those choices, just like smoking cigarettes, just like the different campaigns have been at different aspects. So there has to be an education, an honest educational component. And there has to be a solid, unwavering approach to seek justice. And that means begin to destroy those organizations from the foundation all the way to the top. And if you're doing that, are you going to eliminate crime? No, there's always going to be that 10%. But if we have society that's for us, they're more likely to, hey, this is coming up in our neighborhood. And I would get these calls from people from all levels. This is coming up in our neighborhood. You need to help me out with this. Gotcha. I got your back. And then I can't tell you how many times I've been in fights in the street where the people in those same neighborhoods came up to back me up against the different OGs or gangs that thought they were going to start running roughshod all over again.
Would that approach the OGs, I guess, would they be the stigma of, snitching or being a informant or anything like that? Like, would they ever get those kinds of, because essentially they're working with the police. Mm-hmm. Would they be accused by the neighborhood of being, a snitch?
Okay, so anybody that's ever done any real time in prison knows that everybody talks sooner or later, except for the young ones. They don't know any better. People don't understand this. Young guys, they go in, they're down for the cause. A lot of those guys don't talk, and that's why they go away for insane years, and the OGs don't, quite often. And But let's talk about using confidential informants or snitches. And by the way, there's two different levels. Confidential informants, I have respect for. Snitches, not so much. Snitches are somebody. So here's a way to look at it. If you're running, say you're running drugs out of your community and you're snitching off people, all right, and you're trying to burn them. Well, that's for your benefit to make yourself look good, to get money, what have you. You're doing these different things. We know what you are. We're going to take you down sooner or later, but we're going to let you do that to yourself. Our confidential informants, they're not being hypocritical. They're like, man, I want out. This is what's going on. This is where you need to be. And we protected them because they like, look, I know I'm going to go to jail for 20 years. I know these things are going to happen. I don't care. This needs to stop. Those ones, they were willing to put their life in the line. Now, that being said, never lost a snitch, never lost a CI. I worked hard to protect both of them. Whether I liked either one, that's a different story. Because it was still my responsibility to protect them, to shield them. Now, also keep in mind, there's unwilling participants. They don't know their CIs. And yeah, they don't understand. That's a whole nother conversation about how
he's undercover. That's why, because they don't know.
Yeah. So even like when I was deep cover, like I said, I was a tax collector. My job was, I had a reputation for being very hardcore. There was rumors that I had killed multiple people. I was a 2 to 3 officer minimum contact in San Bernardino, Rialto, Redlands, Riverside, LA sheriffs. There was multiple warrants. No other officers knew I existed except the chief and sergeant lieutenant. My job was, if I got arrested with anything, I would continue my undercover program in the jails. It was done really differently. So my job, so I was then in those levels and I was seeing different things. And of course, my handlers helped that reputation even grow further. And the crackheads and the tweakers.
Wait, I'm sorry. Did you say like you went to jail? Like
no. If I would have got caught, most law enforcement, they weren't smart enough to catch me. I know that sounds very cocky, but they didn't understand. And that's a whole nother show in history. This is all public record. It was all grand jury testimony. This all come out what I did. So I'm not letting secrets out of the bag that weren't already made public record a while ago.
Yeah.
And
wow.
so
if I get arrested, I'm snitching. So immediately, most people pick up my badge. Listen up.
Let's say I arrest.
Case closed.
Let's say I arrest all of you guys. God forbid. And here's the game. You're all going to be in separate interview rooms. I'm going to come to you. Here's how it's going to work. He who rolls first gets the deal. Who's going to roll? You might be like, miss, you're like, I ain't going down like that. I ain't like that. I'm solid. I'm down with the cause. You don't got nothing on me. Yeah, you're right. I go to Chad. Hey, you know what? Listen, nah, man, I'm solid. Ain't doing. I go all the way down, and forgive me, Chuck, man. You're like, you know what? Listen, I see how this goes. You know what?
Well, we already know that Blanchard, he's snitching. He already said. So he's gonna.
I'm gonna go to you with the proposition. Hey, I got something for you. Look.
Listen, I'm gonna tell you. This is what I tell my kids. I don't care. Call my attorney. Call my parents. You just that's all you say. Call my parents. Call my attorney. That. Put it on loop. Put your head down, and that's all you say.
So I had a question real quick, Rick, to go back to something you said. So you talked about you're for kind of a limited legalization of drugs under the caveat of education. My question then becomes, well, who will be in charge of the education piece?
See, there's some of the problems I have with much of the justice system is it's been so politicized, and we can argue this has been going on for decades, that when I talk about reform, when I talk about different things, it's about honesty. So put the stuff out there so people can make their own decision. News should be about, here's the facts, you make your decision. Education, hey, this is both sides of the issues. This is maybe why I chose this side, but this is both sides, honestly. When it comes to politics, honest. But the problem is finding honesty in the education system, in the political system, in the judicial system is something is like finding a diamond in the midst of a big sand mound. It's just very, very difficult. It's almost impossible in some arenas. So,
and go ahead, Rick.
No, it just continue. It's with human nature. So, but it falls back on us too. When I say us, I mean you and me. Either we're part of the problem or we're part of the solution.
Right.
We have so many people that complain, so many pastors, so many people in the churches, in my church, in society, that complain, well, this is wrong and this is wrong, and this politician and that politician. What are you doing?
Right.
Are you out there? Are you trying to educate people? Are you talking to people? Are you whatever it might be? Or are you just believing everything that comes down to the pipe of entertainment and picking your entertainment gods and following what they say without researching anything? We need to be the filter of truth. We need to have a filter of truth. And yes, of course, I believe it's the Bible and through Christ. And that's what drives my hermeneutic, so to speak, of life in these different aspects. But realistically, we as a society, we have okayed ignorance. We've been happy with being ignorant in different aspects.
That's the point that I wanted to speak to, because the thing about it is, I'm a man who has a business and has a family, and I'm responsible for my business. I'm responsible for my family, which means I'm responsible for the guys that I hire. I'm responsible for basically establishing a culture in my company and what the rules are, and drug testing, and making sure that we are having good customer service. And because of that, I want to make sure that the guys that I'm bringing into our company are to a certain caliber. When it comes to raising the 4 kids of mine, again, establishing a culture, ensuring that we're doing everything right, that we're honoring the Lord our God. This is the culture that I inhabit, the culture that I cultivate, and the people who I associate with in real life tend to share the values that I have. I'm not in the inner city. I'm not in, down, south side of Chicago or the bad parts of Dallas or anything like that. And so when it comes to a lot of these environments where there is high crime rates, where there is a glorification of decadence and degeneracy, it goes back to something Chuck said earlier, which is, who cast the spell? And to the extent that there are individuals, whether they be do-gooders or whether they be people who are genuinely trying to go in and mentor and this, that, and the other, it's hard work. There tends to be a lot of burnout. I know personally friends of mine who are educators who went into a lot of these schools and had aspirations of changing things and being a father figure in situations where many of these kids don't have fathers, and they burn out really quickly because for all of their trying, they find that they are oftentimes spat in the face. And not only that, but you have the administration working against them, who are more interested and more eager to cater to and placate the degenerate elements of the school, as opposed to really fostering good, wholesome values. And so for me, I was leading up to a question. I've now forgotten what that question is, but when it comes to the fact that in a lot of these communities, you have a very strong no snitching policy. And I get what you say when you distinguish snitching from confidential informing. So I get where you're coming from, but the fact is, it seems that when you take the strong no snitching policy in tandem with the glorification of decadence, degeneracy, and vice, it becomes all the more difficult to really go in and be that kind of educator and be that kind of trendsetter for good and wholesome values when you're rejected. And you're rejected because a lot of these folks who are from these communities see you as an outsider, see you as someone who you can't possibly understand my plight, and they completely disregard the fact that, hey, at least I'm here and I'm trying to make a difference. I'm trying to establish and instill something good and wholesome. I know personally friends of mine who are even from some of these communities, and they become football coaches or somebody, basketball coaches, somebody of prominence in terms of the community, and even they are rejected. And they say, like, I don't know. I mean, you've heard the stories. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. So I'm not saying that we should give up on these communities, but at the same time, like what I see happening, from a political perspective is, well, since we can't really change things in these communities, the least we can do is decriminalize certain things that go on in these communities. So we can pat ourselves on the back and say, look, we did something in terms of not, filling up the prisons or filling up the jails. And so it makes it look like they did something noble or did something worthwhile, when all they did was refuse to call sin, sin, refuse to call crime, crime. And I get it. Like, when it comes to malin prohibita, when it comes to laws that are going after things that,
secondary.
Right, shouldn't
Like,
necessarily be like,
yeah.
right. It's kind of up in the air as to whether this is genuinely a crime or not. Like, I get it, but at the same time, that's not what's really going on in a lot of these communities. You have kids like literally shooting each other. Like, you have, old women being robbed and old men being hit upside the head and taken for everything that they got. And so it becomes a very difficult thing to really pursue justice in these communities, because you have everybody opining on the way that the police should act in this situation or that situation, when the reality is, shouldn't we be, I don't know. I feel like I've been kind of ranting for a while here, but anyway.
Chad, if I may chime in, Chad.
Chuck, do you mind if we read our super chats really quick?
They are awesome. I've been watching the different things in your chats.
Hold that thought really quick. Let me just read them so we can show some appreciation. It's been going for a while here. We have Jahan, who is our first out of the night, with a $10 super sticker. Thank you so much, Jahan. A loyal watcher. Jesus loves you. He says, God bless the chat. Quisha, Chad, Chuck, and Blanche. Thank you so much for the super chat. We have Cruise Missile with a super sticker. We have Will, a super chat that says, the prison industrial complex is the new Jim Crow. Sorry to all my beautiful ebony Americans. Here's more reparations to right the wrongs of Team Whitey. Don't blow it all on Newports and Nikes. Thank you so much, Will, for your reparations. We'll take more of that wherever that came from. Thank you. Vintage Goods 1551 Willie says this is to do decriminalize criminal behavior. P.S. Got that worship God, not man shirt. Well, thanks for getting the shirt. This is to
decriminalize criminal behavior.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much for that. Really says Satan makes every issue race, good or bad. That is a fact. Let's see. Jenin TV says, appreciate your podcast. God bless. Thank you so much. God bless you as well. We have Pretty Liddy. She says, Kaepernick said abolish prison and abolish police. That was horrible. He is wrong. Only martial law and more crime from the youth will come from that. Agreed. Let's see. Joro B, super sticker, $5. Thank you so much. And Pamela, another faithful watcher, Pamela Callahan, a $5 super sticker. Thank you guys so very much. We really appreciate it. Okay.
Was that the Jerobi from Tribe Called Quest?
Tribe Called Quest, that's what I was thinking about. As soon as he said Jerobi. I'm a Tribe Called Quest. No, but Chad hinted on something, and I'm gonna go back to something Rick said when he was talking about confidential informants and snitching. And of course, I mean, I will give Rick the floor all day, every day when it comes to the inner workings of law enforcement. I feel like I'm watching, listening to him tell these stories. I don't know if you are familiar with this YouTube channel called The Soft Underbelly. And these people come on there and they tell some of the craziest stories, from former prostitutes to prison guards who saw all kinds of crazy things to people. I don't know. So listening to Rick is kind of reminding me. I'm just like listening to him tell these tales. I'm sure he probably has some things that he, wouldn't even feel comfortable sharing with us here. But for me, I can't help but in my mind, of course, I have to sort of go the political route. I mean, Rick was right. We talk about the difference between snitching and being a confidential informant. A lot of times, even like the youth today, they have this whole no snitching culture, this whole thing, backwards. It's not so much about not snitching on the criminal element that victimizes the quote unquote squares, as they would call them, those who are outside the game. I mean, because when it comes to that soft underbelly, they have their own internal sort of law enforcement mechanisms that they use to regulate, their own behavior. But we are not applicable to those norms and mores because we did not sign up to live that lifestyle. When the criminal preys on your grandmother or your child, or you for that matter, I mean, that's what you pay your taxes for. That's what the police are for. That's what the prisons are for. If you are a victim of a crime, you go and tell. If you live to see yourself, if you live through it, or if someone that you know is a victim of a crime, you go and tell. This whole thing about no snitching, it just applies to criminals snitching on other criminals, of course, because they got caught and whatever the case may be. And it's like, well, okay, well, you caught me, but I'm willing to tell on so-and-so who has not gotten caught yet, if it means that, of course, you guys would take it a little bit easier on me. So there is this, because, there, as the old saying goes, or the old question goes, this looming question of, is there any honor amongst thieves? I guess to some degree there used to be, but who exactly knows where criminals stand now when it comes to this whole issue of no snitching? I know once upon a time and organized crime, and I made it a point to say this some shows ago when I was talking about the Italian mafia. Of course, this is what they understood. Of course, is to keep a crime in house, so as to prevent crime from spilling over out onto the streets. Because what you do not want in the midst of your criminal activities, you do not want to prompt a breakdown in civility. You do not want to evoke a breakdown in civil order, because that is the fastest way to have law enforcement come in and shut down your operation. That's one of the things law enforcement does not want. Sure, crime is bad in and of itself, but one thing that will incur the attention of law enforcement even faster is if you leave a trail of bodies strewn about the streets, because people do not want to see a breakdown in society. You want to do your criminal deeds, you do it quietly. But again, not making an excuse for it, but law enforcement officers are human beings just like anyone else. And if you make things safe for them, then I can almost guarantee you, perhaps there are some things that they are willing to let slide, as long as they get to go home safe and sound to their loved ones as well. So when I think about this whole talk of informants and whatnot, I mean, this is the same thing that you saw even inside of various political organizations. For example, I mentioned the Black Panther Party earlier. And a lot of people talk about COINTELPRO and all this stuff about the FBI doing X, Y, and Z to destabilize these radical groups. Well, oftentimes, a lot of the crimes of these organizations or law enforcement were made aware about these crimes because of these confidential informants, to Rick's point, because there were a lot of people who were inside the organization who either felt as though they were next, if you will, they were about to be the victims of the likes of someone, say, like a Huey P. Newton or like a Geronimo Pratt. And so a lot of them may have submitted evidence to law enforcement in the event of their demise because they were on the hit list. And this is how this would occur oftentimes, because a lot of these people, to Rick's point, like he mentioned, they just wanted out because they said to themselves, we didn't sign up for this. And I think that is especially kind of worth mentioning when you talk about how these people wanted to portray themselves as though they were doing something good for the community, and they found out that that was the furthest thing from the mind of the people who ran these organizations. And oftentimes, when it came to, for example, the criminal element, California, Oakland, and so on and so forth, was a lot of times the law enforcement's hands would be tied because there was this perception amongst the media and politicians that certain groups of individuals were to remain untouched because law enforcement and other people who were interested in it, if they were to go about trying to break these organizations down and get these people off the streets who they knew were responsible for these crimes, they were afraid that they would be accused of being racist. A lot of, even in California, in Northern California, in places where the Black Panther Party would operate, you had a lot of local journalists who knew of a lot of the murders and crimes that were being committed by the Black Panther Party members, but they wouldn't report on them unless a Black journalist did the story first. And oftentimes these Black journalists would not touch these stories. So a lot of times law enforcement's hands were tied because they didn't want to incur the wrath of people outside of the law enforcement apparatus, because they were going to be kind of chastised as being a kind of racist police organization that was looking to destroy these political figures and what have you. And I think too as well, for example, you talk about gang leaders, I think about Larry Hoover. Now there's this ongoing campaign to free Larry Hoover. All of this talk about how he has been rehabilitated. Even if you listen to the words of his son, I think Larry Hoover Jr., who is funny as I listened to Larry Hoover. He was on one of Kanye West's latest albums, thanking Kanye for leading the charge to help free Chicago native Larry Hoover. And while Larry Hoover was on the album making these statements about his father's predicament, he made it a point to say that his father was a quote unquote victim of this capitalist system. I don't know if you all are familiar with that. Chad probably knows what I'm talking about because he has probably heard the song Jesus Lord, where Larry Hoover Jr. makes this comment, right? And again, you even saw this when it comes to these criminals. They try to hide behind this veneer of their kind of political bona fides. No more clear-cut example of this to speak of the Italian mob when you consider the story of Joe Colombo. Those of you who don't know Joe Colombo, he was the Don of the Colombo Mafia family in New York. And Joe Colombo, get this now, while being the head of one of the 5 mafia families of New York, he went on to create the Italian American Civil Rights League, where he masqueraded himself as some protector of the civil liberties of the Italian people, all whilst running a criminal enterprise. And of course, he was eventually assassinated. He didn't die from the bullet. He died from a heart attack as a result of the gunshot. But he was silenced by the mafia because they said, we ain't with all this political stuff, bro. Sit down somewhere. We do things quietly. But his defense against his criminal activity was he was going to portray himself as some oppressed Italian minority, all whilst he was the Don of one of the 5 families. Can you believe this? That's the story of Don Colombo, in short.
You bring up. Oh, go ahead, sir.
I wanted to, and great points, Chuck, as always. So I did remember kind of the question that I had, which was, Rick, when you see the fact that a lot of these politicians, mostly, and not to make this a right-left thing, but mostly on the leftist side of the political persuasion, trying so hard to decriminalize things that are now abhorrent. You see them doing this with drugs. You see them doing this with quote unquote sex work. So we all know that human trafficking is a serious problem. And the fact is they're trying to, again, decriminalize human trafficking, decriminalize quote unquote sex work. And when it comes to guns, they're trying to completely ban guns in the United States totally. And so they're not so much decriminalizing murder or decriminalizing gun wounds. Their approach to that is altogether different. And so when you see in a lot of these communities, a lot of gangs surrounding the trafficking of drugs, the trafficking of prostitution, and basically protection of territory with guns, this is kind of their way of going about solving the problem of crime. And so when I hear you say that you do agree with a certain element of the decriminalization of certain drugs under the caveat of education, how is what you're proposing any different from what you see a lot of the leftists proposing in terms of the way to solve the problem of crime in these communities? Obviously, I respect your opinion, and you communicate with a certain degree of wisdom. So I'm more interested in hearing what you have to say on the matter than some leftist politician who we all know what their agenda is. But again, how would you distinguish what you're arguing from what they're arguing in terms of, well, what we can it's the same argument, in my opinion, that I don't know if you saw this, but what's the dark-skinned lawyer, Ben Crump, the same argument that he made, where like, I know how you can get rid of crime in America: decriminalize the black man. That's the way you can you get rid of crime overnight, he said. So like, how do you distinguish between what Ben Crump is arguing and what you're arguing?
Well, first, let me go back to the beginning. I am not for drug use. I'm not for anything that clouds our mind or judgment. I'm a firm believer that as men, as people in society, and I don't mean to exclude, and certainly not excluding our wonderful, beautiful woman here on the panel, I want you to understand something. So one of the biggest problems we have is the way things are legalized. Let's take a look at marijuana. Instead of actually a healthy approach where this is what we've done, is the way we've legalized it, we've actually empowered and emboldened the cartels. A majority of our marijuana dispensers, because of how it's done, are actually funding cartels, are actually funded by, or at least funding other criminal organizations. So the way we did it, the way we opened up about it, the way we allowed these things to go with basically different communities, and the way we sold this bill of goods to different communities, it has caused the increase of human trafficking. We know what it brings. We have decriminalized many of the actions. Now, keep in mind, this is where it goes. If you are educating properly, and this is if we have the ability to do that, if you are dealing, if you are selling, if you're offering these things illegally, if you're passing them up to different people, if your sources are coming, these are a lot of ifs, and I go down the road, that if you choose to do these drugs, if you are selling these drugs, you'll be held accountable, meaning that if you commit a crime, these are no longer an excuse. If you're high, you don't go to work. If you're doing these things, you lose your license for life. There are definite penalties. But if you need help, we should be able to, again, I'm addicted to drugs, we recognize it's helped the person who actually really wants to get out. The dealers, the cartels, the OGs that are actually profiting the different groups, we need to enforce them. Now, here's the problem, and I don't know how to get around this. Okay, and minds greater than me getting together, you guys may be able to come up with a better solution. I recognize that just arresting a user, the end user, isn't going to solve the problem. But now taking the dealer off the street and making it difficult for him to get illegal drugs into the country, shutting down the borders to a certain degree, we control the drugs that come in. When people are bringing drugs illegal, we know they're funding criminal organizations, hammering them to the point where they realize it's not worth it. I mean, when you and I, we could go in our bathrooms and we can cook up just with some minor pharmaceuticals and a few utensils. I can make several $100,000 of drugs with just $2,500 investment. And I can turn that several $100,000 drug, stomp on it, cut it, divvy it out. That turns into a couple $1 million within a week. Within 2 weeks, I can turn that $2 million into 10 to 20. The profit is there. And from my enforcement, supposedly, let's go back to my undercover days, where my agency in California touted me as having the most successful undercover operation of its type to that date. You would think that crime, or at least the cost of drugs, would go down because we had such this huge effect. Well, the exact opposite happened. Or not go down, but the cost of drugs would actually go up. They actually began to go down. What happened? We took all these users, all these small dealers off the streets. We did that, and we were successful in that. But we weren't attacking the root of the problem. Why are people using drugs? Why are these people turning to prostitution? Yes, ultimately, it's a sinful nature and different things like that. But
But
many of these,
who's the we though? When you say we aren't attacking the root of the issue,
I mean,
is the we the
society in
police?
general.
Who's the we?
So we's the churches, the families, the fathers, the mothers, the schools, the police, the politicians. It's all of
So
us. When I say,
what then do you do when there's an imbalance in terms of, I mean, because you're doing your job apparently by virtue of your arrest rate and the fact that you are being creative in terms of communicating with drug lords and the kingpins and the shot callers. But there seems to be an imbalance in terms of the Black inner city is concerned, in terms of where's the pastor? He's just as corrupt as the drug lord. Where the churches? Where the there's no fathers in the home, and it's not because they're mass incarcerated. It's just because they are not interested in being home. And so it's like when it comes to society, because you always hear people saying that society, by virtue of capitalism, has let the inner city down, or has let the community down, or let whomever down. And again, and that's why I started my last little rant with, like, I'm in my community. I try to be responsible with the people who are within my kind of constellation. And the fact is, like, I do think that there's incentive in being a responsible human being, but there seems to be this kind of imbalance in terms of the people that you call we, in terms of an interest in seeing to it that your community is safe, protected, this, that, and the third. And then what you have happen as far as society is concerned is that these same people who aren't playing their part are looking to government, are looking to policy, and are in fact looking to the police to do their work for them, looking to the schools to do what they should be doing. And so what then?
So we go back to the community policing model. So keep in mind, it was more than just going to the OGs or the shot callers in the neighborhood. I also went to the parents. I showed them videos of their children. This is what your children are doing. This is where they're at. This is proof. Now, either you're with me or against me. You're allowing your children to do this business. You're allowing this to occur in your home. You're allowing this thing. Now you know. Now you're part and parcel of the problem. You cannot claim ignorance. And if you are aiding and abetting, I will treat you that way. So parents began like, oh no, little Johnny or Janie, you're not going out of the house, because if you go out of the house, Barnes is coming after me. And I saw what he did to our neighbor. I saw what they did. They took him off their funding. They took him off their education. They lost everything because little Johnny or Janie was out there slinging rocks or was out there shooting up the street or doing something else. They took the parents down, not just the kids, not just the quote. We began looking for the source of the problem. And keep in mind, it's not a one-stop shop. And we also need to hold our people accountable. We have a habit of these people. Society's always looking for the savior, not the real savior. Lord forbid that they should actually look to Christ or God that has a solid morality. And I could pontificate about that all day long. But the aspect is they want the quick solution that relieves them of any responsibilities, that some man or woman is going to come with some title and take that and say, I'm going to solve all your problems. So we're quick to just bare our souls and give up our money and vote for them because they say the right things. And it is that refusal to take responsibility and refusal to take care of it that needs to be addressed. If I have parents and I would go, listen, if you need help with resources for your children, I've got you. But if you are allowing your child and you're not reaching out for help and you're not actually really trying, I'm going to get you. If you, as an employer, we go back to that, you are knowingly allowing these things to go on. I show you, this is what's going on from your businesses. I already know who you're attached to. I know where you're from. I know what's going on. I've done my research. I don't go in with ignorance. I've already done my homework. I know what I can do. I don't make empty threats. I make promises. And so when we go into those community situations, this is a problem. This is the root of the problem. Yeah, you may have come from a hard family, you may have these different things. These are the resources I can bring to help you and help you give your children and yourself a better life if you allow me, if you work with me. But either, again, you're working with me or against me. But this goes back then to, so we have to hold the community responsible, but then who's holding law enforcement responsible for this? We got the chiefs that are getting elected, and they want to get elected next year. You know, one of the chiefs, in fact, I knew a few different chiefs, that they would purposely do whatever it took to be on the political tickets. When I started working my own cases for investigations, I got to see politics even at a deeper level, which was horrific and shocking. We had a government that was complicit. I would call up FBI individuals that I used to work with and say, look, these politicians are doing this. Help me. You know what the response was? You're on your own. We can't touch them. And I would get those warnings. I would have judges that they wanted us to take care of these different aspects. And when we go in, we start taking care of my agency, R&R Investigative Solutions and Trinity Investigations, a couple different companies that I had sold off. And my wife asked me to come home years ago from that. We were, to my knowledge, and still are, the only private investigative agency that the courts in both LA County, and San Bernardino County said they trusted us in our evidence collection and our witness as far as gathering and our report process more than they did local law enforcement. They publicly stated that. That's a horrible problem. So why aren't we holding our politicians and our police officers to the standards? Why are we allowing police departments to hire substandard officers that may have good degrees, but they're afraid when they go in the street? We say we want departments to mirror the community. That's not the truth. Not at all.
So how, if those families' parents are not, don't have a handle on their own children, I'm not surprised that they're not really understanding of what's going on politically, also. So, I'm not surprised that they are not voting in people or holding their elected officials accountable. I mean, they kind of, if they're not paying attention with their own kids, they're probably not paying attention to politics all that much either. Let's play this clip really quick, and let's get everybody's take on this.
Your friend, our friend, Senator Tim Scott, he had a police reform bill that he was trying to get passed, and it had a lot of the right things in it about more body cameras, less chokeholds, more regulations. The Democrats filibustered the bill. In a time where you need some level of meeting in the middle, and it feels like that police reform bill that Tim Scott was trying to put together was an attempt at meeting in the middle. Can we really show the American people in this election cycle that nothing is better than something?
We have not found the common ground necessary to get a bill introduced. We're still working on it. We still are having dialogue literally as most recent as last week to try to find a way, because we both agree. And Tim has told compelling stories on the Senate floor about what it's like growing up as a black man in America and having that disproportionate treatment. There's some foundation to work together. He and I have we're on different sides of the aisle, but we have a friendship, and I'm hoping we can get something done.
That's not the clip I thought that was, but that's okay. We can talk about that. So the First Step Act with, that Donald Trump, under Donald Trump with Van Jones and Cory Booker and all the people who were involved there at the time, it seemed to be like, okay, this was a pretty good thing. Everybody except probably Chad and maybe some other folks. I mean, I was not really, I didn't hear people like Chad speaking out against it, and to hear his perspective on it, to give that other side. What do you think about, and this is for Rick, what do you think, and then for everybody else, about that bill in particular, the First Step Act, this idea that people were getting more time for low-level crime than that Black people were getting more time for low-level crime than other people, whites in particular. Do you think, from what you've seen, is that accurate? Is that, did they have a point? What do you think about, just kind of in general, what do you think about that policy?
So So from working criminal defense, and I myself and my companies, we handled hundreds of cases from multiple counties and areas, federal, state, local. So from looking at those cases, let me tell you where the major problem lies. It wasn't with race. It was socioeconomic status. If you don't have the money to buy a good attorney, a good investigator, you're screwed by the system. Also, if you're not beautiful, I don't care what skin color you are. If you look at beautiful women, beautiful men that look really good, well, and this is what I started seeing in the defense attorneys and in the prosecuting office. They would sit there and they would play like cards. Well, I like this guy better than this guy, and he looks like I can sell him to the jury more, and they're going to like this woman better than that. And they would be then trading these deals. So I'm going to talk to you from basically both sides of the aisle. And it's something that's infuriating, but this is also human nature. This is we get back to the corrupt nature of the human being and what we are and our need for Christ. But let's go away from that just for a minute. So I'll give you an example. I handled an SA case. I know because depending where this is, it can get bleeped out or whatever else. If I say the wrong thing, I know that the censorship is real, unfortunately. So I handled where this gentleman had been accused of SA. I did investigate. First, I met with him, and he came across as being very honest. I looked at the interview tapes from the woman that accused him, and I'm like, there seems to be a problem. We took on the case, and we knew he couldn't afford it, but it looked like a solid case. We had enough in our coffers we could take on so many free cases on sliding scale. We worked hard on doing that. And then we found actually evidence and even her friends that were willing to say, yeah, we know it didn't happen. We found videotape evidence showing exactly the opposite. In fact, the reason why she had reported him is because he refused her advances. And this poor man, he was a roughneck and oil rig. He got the crud kicked out of him as soon as the arrest came down. When these guys he worked with found out, he lost his career, he lost his house, he lost his cars, he lost everything. And I go, as this is happening, I go to the defense attorney. I go to the one that's the prosecuting attorney. And I say, hey, listen, I'd love to meet with you. Everybody knows I'm straight. I testify truth no matter where it falls. This is truth no matter what it is. I didn't see myself as a mercenary, just somebody who brought the truth, wherever it failed. If you hired me, if I worked in your case, I'm just going to bring it out. Let the jury decide. And I said, I need to meet with this because this is a horrible travesty of justice. Why didn't law enforcement officers discover this? Well, I can explain why in a minute, but I go to the DA's office and I meet with this lady, the assistant DA, and talking with her. And she goes, hey, before you stop, you're always being pretty straightforward. You're not going to record us today. I said, no, I'll tell you what, I put my recorder aside there. You can see that was a mistake. That was ignorance that I never failed at. I did not do again. Unfortunately, it caused me an issue. She says, good, because I know you're going to keep your word. I know he's not guilty. And the expression that Chad just had, it was the same expression I had. You know this? She said, yeah. I know he didn't do it. But he's in the abbreviation or the acronym we'd use in law enforcement is Adam Henry. And all men are Adam Henry. And I'm sure he did it to someone. So I'm going to make sure he goes down. You know what? Here's the thing, Rick. I know that I can't beat you in court. I know that you've got more than enough evidence. I don't care. I've already won. I've destroyed his life. He will never have a life back. You will win. And he goes, and she also then continued to explain. I said, well, you know that she's lying. Yep. And there's not a damn thing you can do about it. So we won the case. I tried to go after her and showed that she lied. She perjured herself on stand. We had evidence of that. She admitted to lying, admitted everything. We tried to get the case then brought up where the courts would actually hear and go after the victim. You think the head DAs of the county would go after the victim? They said, it doesn't look good for us. We're not going after the victim. The supposed reporter of this crime. Yeah. See, and this is what I've seen time and time again. I've seen this across the racial spectrum. And so if this man would have had money, The DAs would have recognized he's higher educated, he's got more surrounding people, he's better standing in society, because he looked like he was this 6'4", very solid white man with tattoos, looked like something come out of a magazine, did not look like the prettiest guy in the world, didn't talk very pretty. He was a hardcore warrior, not a racist, not a sexist, just not very educated. He was a lamb to the slaughter. And we won that case. But the problem is, no courts would touch the civil or the criminal case. And even the attorneys that I tried to get on, you got to understand how he looks. If I try and defend him, if we work with him, it's going to look, you can get away with it. You guys did a good job, but he's going to have to figure out how to make his life. And even after we won, people still will go after it. Let's say they did take that. They look back and they see the records and they go back and see the arrest for what it was for. The stigma is still there. Now, this happened several years ago, and it's not the only case where I've seen like that. So now, should the officers involved in the investigation, should they have known he didn't do it? Yes. Did they bother to investigate the case properly? No. In fact, I never actually won a case when I worked defense, meaning that they lost the cases. It wasn't mine to win. We had an amazing track record. The cases we took on, our side always was quote unquote the winners, but it wasn't because we won the cases, because they didn't have a case to begin with. Because it was poor investigation, poor prosecutors were taking their improper stances. They didn't, keep in mind, from what I saw, the system wasn't racially imbalanced. I'm not going to say that racism doesn't occur. We all know the human nature. People see things, they do things, they say stupid things. I'm not ignorant enough to say that it never happens on any front. But what I am saying is, if it would have been applied to somebody who looked better, the DA wouldn't have gone after him. If he'd been somebody who came from means and highly educated, they'd recognize the jury would like him more. It wouldn't look good in the press. But because he looked like you might think some stereotype might be, he's an easy mark. And I've seen this happen with robberies, with drug dealing, with prostitution charges, with burglaries, with murders. Or homicides, not just murders, but homicides. I've seen this happen in multiple different areas. And the stress and frustration of watching the justice system that I believed in for so long fail in such a rudimentary level broke my heart time and time again, which is why we fought harder.
Is there any law that, you can be charged with like filing a false police report. What else is there for people who do things like this woman did? Like, I don't know if there's anything else on the books for as far as the law is concerned that can happen to people who do things like that.
If the legal system operated unbiasedly as it's supposed to, if justice is blind, like it's supposed to be, then just by mere fact of the law, not only should she have gone to jail and publicly brought out in the press and publicly shown, this is what you get for lying, this is what she did, and brought these things out. The law allows for that, by the way. And same with the DA, and we had evidence that they knew, and all these, everything else. But here's the problem. It didn't look good for the press. The DAs they were not going to take it because it's not going to help them get elected. Because at that time, this is when the beginning of that movement.
Me Too.
Yes, thank you. That's the word I was looking for, the Me Too movement. And the politically was motivated, and everybody started saying Me Too, which I worked with San Bernardino Sexual Assault Services for years. Was a counselor and a training with them. One of my areas of expertise is, I just said the word I know I'm not supposed to, SA. I worked with my wife. How I met her was a counselor with this organization as well. And of course, now she's a teacher and all these wonderful things. I understood it, and I saw this taking away the credibility of real people that have been victimized, because there are so many people that I would see in law enforcement, false reports come across all the time. But good investigation, we ferreted it out, and we were able to solve it. But it goes back to the root of the cause. Are we hiring good officers? Are we supporting good officers? Are our politicians really interested in real law enforcement? And are they really interested in real peacekeeping? is the education system really and truly educating or indoctrinating?
But is there a law? Is there a law though, other than that one?
Yeah.
Okay, there are other laws.
There are actually different laws. There are laws basically where you can. My brain is addled right now. Where you basically, if you come against somebody's character unrighteously, and I can't remember the legal term for it right now. Again, I apologize. That you can actually go after them civilly,
like
showing damages. Thank you. Defamation of character. Those laws exist for these different reasons.
Oh, I
so
see. Okay.
there are those things, but here's the problem. Will the court listen to you? Will the courts accept your case? Will there be attorneys to take it? So unless you have the legal wherewithal to fight these cases, and here's the key, the money to push it forward. Because even though we were willing to work this case for free, and even though we were willing, we still had to feed our families, so we couldn't divide our different time on that. The attorneys that I found that were willing to stand up for this thing, they recognized it'd be career suicide. And I found some other guys who were willing to stand up for that. But then the judges are like, yeah, it's not going to go anywhere. So the system, again, just like when you investigate a crime, you want to know what's really going on, you follow the money. If you want to know what's happening in our society today, who's getting rich, who's not? Who's really making the money? You know, everybody thinks it's this Republicans against Democrats, and I can make some arguments against both parties, or red against blue, black against white, whatever it might be. It has nothing to do with that. Even the gangs, we go back to the gang level. I originally thought racist gangs were racist. You know, that sounds really weird to say. When I started running with different shot callers, and I'm taking on these different assignments given to me by different gangs, I found out that there were actually members of white supremacy gangs that were actually half black, that were Native American, that were Asian, that were actually part of the different Irish group or black groups that were not the same. It had nothing to do with race. It was about how much money can you bring in. It had nothing to do with that. What was that?
No, I was just talking over you a little bit. I mean, we saw that. I mean, I'm not going to say that I get, glean all my knowledge from films, but, of course, what you're saying we saw that depicted in the film American History X. Remember when the guy went to prison and he was so gung-ho about this white supremacist thing, and then he went in there and started rocking the boat when he saw his fellow, members of his white supremacist group were doing business with the black prisoners. And he said, what's going on with you guys? And of course, he was causing so much of a stir. And we saw what happened in the notorious shower scene in the film American History X. And he was essayed by members of his own white supremacist Aryan Brotherhood group, or whatever they called themselves, because they had to tell him, bro, this is prison. It doesn't work that way in here. You can talk that, the white man is superior man stuff on the outside, but it doesn't work that way in here. It's about survival. And so if the blacks have something to offer, then we do business. That's how it works. But anyway, I'm sorry.
No. That's actually really valid. It's still true today. But here's the big deal. Our politicians, and again, I'm not picking Republican or Democrat side. I'm not picking any political side. We have seen them time and time again align themselves with groups, with organizations we know that have a purposeful agenda against morality of society, against the family, against real womanhood, against real manhood, against family, the family unit itself. Go ahead.
Well, see, that's what I wanted to say too, Rick. I think it's something. I think Chad mentioned it earlier. Not just when it comes to the criminal system, but also when it comes to other things that is slightly related. Say, for example, when it comes to child protective services. And so many things, are slipping through the cracks there. There was, of course, that one famous case that became that Netflix documentary that everyone was talking about, that everyone was watching, involving that one young kid. I forgot his name. But yeah, we see this happen there, where these, social workers and their caseloads are so astronomical that they aren't even, doing their due diligence to try to protect these children and try to remove them from dangerous situations. And then we have people who criticize that for saying that, well, the institution of child protective services is leaning too much into trying to, for the sake of what is in the best interest of the parent, to quote unquote keep the family united. But the problem is that when society is beginning to break down in other areas, that's when we are beginning to lean heavily upon the state, and we are requiring the state, whether it's again the legal system or child protective services as another example. We're asking them to do something that they cannot do. We're asking them to do something that they are not equipped to do, because society in fact is breaking down in other ways that are far more, I guess, core and central to the individual, to the human being himself. Something else is going on, and I like it. You made the point to bring up socioeconomic. It reminds me of something I heard Dr. Umar Johnson say. Rick, you may or may not know who Dr. Umar Johnson is. We're all familiar with him on this panel, and I remember Dr. Umar Johnson. He's one of these, loudmouth pro-black activists, and I heard him say once upon a time that quote unquote 95% of blacks currently incarcerated are in fact innocent. That is his claim. And when pressed on this issue, how do you support that? These numbers, 95%. He says, well, the reason being is because they could not afford adequate representation. So again, there's that sort of Marxian economic critique sort of bleeding into our perception of the law and its purpose. But and I think it's a bit difficult because, of course, you have people. You made a point, and I've actually seen data or I've heard of people, say that studies have been conducted that have proven that, again, people who are more attractive, for example, are they are more likely to be found not guilty or relieve lighter sentences and so on. And so there's the aesthetic component, and you mentioned the socioeconomic component. And so people who are more well off can afford better representation. They can wage, lawfare longer because they have deeper pockets and so on and so forth. And so how exactly do we kind of fix this issue? And this goes back to what I mentioned when I talked about the early 60s and the whole rise of the criminal justice movement, the attempt on behalf of those involved in the practice of law, whether they be lawyers, judges, law professors, and so on and so forth. They wanted to create this system or this situation where every individual who is accused of having committed a crime had just as much an opportunity as someone who was richer, or even someone who was more intelligent, who was more aware, if you will, of their constitutional rights and so on, so as to create a situation where the system, if you will, wouldn't take advantage of poorer criminals, or wouldn't take advantage of criminals who weren't as attractive, or to take advantage of criminals who weren't, as intelligent, and so on and so forth. And I think that the problem for me is that we are trying to take on tasks that we haven't figured out yet, and in so doing, we create more problems than we do solutions. We make the situation worse because there may in fact not be a solution when it comes to how do you balance out these socioeconomic inequities amongst those who have been accused of committing a crime, when we live in a free society wherein people are allowed, based upon our free market system, to get rich. Some people are going to be richer than others. Some lawyers are going to be better than other lawyers. Some people come from certain disadvantaged backgrounds, families, and so on and so forth. And so I don't really think in the long run that there are adequate solutions to many of these problems. And when we try to find solutions, we end up creating more problems. I don't know if Blanche wanted to jump in. He's been quiet for a while, but I'll cede the floor.
I think Rick wanted to say something.
Yeah, before I go on, so to support what you're saying, and again, there are no easy solutions. There's not one stop. One of the difficulties we had is we have to recognize that. So before, it's like what I was going to say before, let's talk about this. I have been all over the world. I've been to places all throughout Europe and other areas for different contracts, what have you. And I've got to experience legal systems throughout the world. And I'm going to keep in mind, our legal system's still the best in the world, which is sometimes scares me. There are a lot of people in our system that truly believe, just like I do, just like you do, and they're doing the best that they can. They're fighting the fight on a daily basis. I don't want to tell you that every court is corrupt. I don't want to tell you that every person is corruptible in the wrong situation. And let's even go to that back to that gentleman. Where did the responsibility start that I told you that was arrested for SA, that we got off, and basically he was found not guilty and the whole works. Let's go back to his behavior in the beginning. Well, his behavior wasn't very good. He was associating with people that weren't very good. He put himself in a situation that realistically was stupid, that I've warned my own kids. Look, this may be a point that some people resonate with, and maybe people think that maybe he needs to stay out. My wife is Black. My children are obviously half Black. And because of that, I'm very aware of different things and stereotypes and cultural events. And I need to be aware, because there are stupid people out there on both sides in every aspect. But that doesn't change how I educate my children. If you are hanging with, if you're playing in the mud, you're going to get mud on you. If you're playing with pigs, you're going to get that crud on you. So you need to remind your children. This goes back to where we started, in the house, back to how community policing actually becomes effective in the house, back to the schools, how they actually get affected properly is in the house first, and then it works its way out. And it goes back to our men being in the house. It goes back to our women choosing the right men to be in the house, and the men choosing the right women to be in the house. It starts in the home and works its way out. And if we are corrupting our homes, if we're not taking responsibility for the corruption we've allowed in through music, through entertainment, through books, through the education system, through our churches, Lord forbid, but we know it happens, then we wonder why this, because corruption, it's bleeding, it's oozing out of our pores in every aspect of society. And it starts with us. It starts with me. Me meaning man in society. We have allowed other people to take our roles. We've stepped down. I'm tired of fighting. You know, people say, I'm tired of this, I'm tired of that. It gets difficult taking shots every day, getting hit in the face every day. You know, I've been hit enough times, physically and emotionally and spiritually throughout my life. And yeah, sometimes you get tired, but I'm not going to give up. I may fight differently, figure out a different way around it. But too many men, too many women, too many people in society are saying, it's okay, you're tired. It's okay to give up. You know what? It's okay, you can't fight. No, if we stand down and be quiet when we see injustice, if I see injustice in any aspect of community, in neighborhood, no matter what they believe in, no matter where they come from, an injustice is injustice no matter what it looks like. And if I'm not willing to call it out for what it is, I've got no right to stand on anything, and I'm not going to stand on anything. If I'm just approaching things with people that look like me or look like you and say this is that or the other, not recognizing we have a systemic problem with human nature in itself and not holding each other accountable in the home where it starts, we're not going to have any success.
So basically, we're to I'm looking at the man in the mirror.
It wouldn't be a cut of the culture.
Thank you. Change his ways. All right, Chad. Oh, Blanche, did you have something?
Well, yeah. When Rick was telling a story about the guy, you know, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking it had to be something else, and just her just saying SA, and there had to be some other elements involved for them to just say, well, we think he did something. And, you know, I talk about before how a lot of people do is, a lot of people that I know get away with crime. And they're around the element, they get away with it. And so people that are watching, the law enforcement, they know they're doing crime. Whether they can catch them doing it, whether they can pinpoint them, but they know they're doing crime and they get away with it, and then they might get jammed up or something, and they may have enough evidence. But all I'm saying is this: rarely is a person just doing what's right, and the police they would take
it come down.
You know what I'm saying? It's just like it just don't happen like that. And I'm sorry to say, I just don't believe it, just based on my own experiences. What I find most of is, like Rick said,
element,
putting yourself in situations that are not going to be good. The people that you hang around, the places that you go, all of these things matter, especially if you look a certain way, and especially, and I'm not talking about black. I'm just talking about, I remember one time we were out late at night riding around. We was in the car 4 deep, and the police pulled us over, and he looking in the car like, where y'all going? And we just riding around. He was like, what? Like it just, and so we hear on the radio shooting. Like we hear shooting. And he was like, all right, y'all, he just left. But the fact of the matter is, why are we riding around? Riding around for like, what are we doing? We looking for trouble. Not saying we actually looking for trouble, but what good can come from us being in the car late at night, 4 deep, riding around to do what? Nobody knows. We just want to ride around, license. And so again, but my point is that a lot of this stuff can be curtailed through what you mentioned, Rick, in the home. Be in the house before the street lights come on. You know, abiding by the curfew, abiding by the rules. One thing I know about bad behavior, if a child is not following rules at home, then that spills over to the school, and then it spills over to the streets. Like it's a ripple effect from the first not honoring your father and your mother. And so I know that when I see a child coming to school breaking the rules, I already know they're breaking the rules at home, and I know if they're breaking the rules at school, they're doing something in the streets. And it just kind of like it just goes with the territory. But when you were telling the story, I was like, the dude could have been 6'4", face tattoos, everything. I was like, there had to be something else in the picture to just say, okay, we want to pick him. And guess what? He could have been innocent. I went to school with a guy, and he said his wife accused him of SA because she was cheating on him and got pregnant. And then she dropped the charges, but the state picked it up. He did a whole presentation on how the state of Arizona picked it up, and he ended up doing, supposed to get 7 years, but he did 4.5 years for quote unquote, he says, her accusing him of doing that. But his argument was your argument, Rick, that he said, I wasn't no criminal like that. They put me in there with the murderers and because of his crime. He said, they threw me in there with the wolves. And he said, I didn't want to die, so I had to click up with the brotherhood, the Aryan brotherhood, but anyway, but my point is, I just feel like when people are talking about justice reform and all this stuff, they don't talk about the culture. And like Meek Mills is on TV like he's a victim. Of like Meek Mills, you riding 4-wheelers throughout the street with no helmet on. You around folks that are doing crime. You glorify crime in your music. If it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it might be a duck. And so Meek Mill, you bought it on yourself because your probation says you're not supposed to be around these people. You're not supposed to be around folks with guns. You're not supposed to be around drugs, but yet you're around the whole element. I know you want to be down with the hood, but you can't be a victim and cash the check. So yeah, I'm just.
You bring up a good point. I remember. So talk about being profiled, and people think profiling is bad. So I'm going to stomp on some toes, hopefully.
No, it ain't bad.
Profiling has its place. So a good example, many years ago, I loved to ride motorcycles. And I loved to pull motorcycles out of junkyard, and there was junkyards. And there's a time when you can't tell now, but I had long hair. I was proud of my long hair. How far the mighty have fallen. But so I'm coming out of this one junkyard. I found this motorcycle. I'm riding. I've got my leather jacket I used to wear when I was undercover. It's got holes. It doesn't look good. I'm looking back just like I was when I was undercover, not really the nicest individual in the world from a distance. And all of a sudden, I'm cruising back to my house, minding the speed limit, and I start seeing cruisers darting in behind other cars. They're trying to line it up to figure out what I am. After a few minutes, I'm like, all right, I'll just go and pull over. I'll make it easy on them. I pull over. They pull right over too. And everybody gets out. They're nervous. They haven't ran me. They haven't done anything else, but they're nervous just by my appearance. And my hands are up. And I'm saying, and they come up, why are your hands up? Because I said, I understand. I understand why you pulled me over. You know why? I said, yeah, because I look like a dirtbag on a bike. And I'd pull me over too. And they looked at, and they stopped. Wait, what are you? A cop. Really? Yeah. Gun badges on the right-hand side. You can grab it. My hands will stay up. I'm not going to reach for it. And they came close and had me step off the bike and very carefully and everything else. And then they saw the gun and badge and like, oh man. I said, no, you did the right thing. I look like a dirtbag. This is my role. You did the right thing. You stopped the guy. This is what I look like. And of course, I was doing light cover. That's very different than the deep cover I did. But my job was to look like a part so I could blend in different areas. So if you look like a dirtbag, if you look like a duck, you quack like a duck, you're going to get treated like a duck until we find out you're not. Yeah. So for my kids and other kids out there, You know, if you're going to get hemmed up, we go back to that gentleman that was arrested for the SA. Had he not been at that bar that was known for fights and problems, he was known for being a fighter, especially when he drank. Had he not, and please, it's going to sound very crude, but listen, if a woman is willing to suddenly, that you don't know for all 2 seconds, and she's willing to give up whatever she's got to you right away, you know, and start making these offers, you probably in dangerous waters. You need to go away from that.
Right.
But, you know, and he entertained that idea, and that got him in more trouble. Yes, the wise part of him decided that I'm not going to do this and cheat on his girlfriend and whatever else is going on. So had he not allowed himself to be caught up in that culture in the first place, that was already into that the problematic aspects of society, had he been taught right by a father who was not in his home, most likely he never would have got caught up in that situation.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
So,
yeah, go ahead.
no, I was just laughing because I remember I shared a story with these guys. You know, you remember when I said I got pulled over when I was younger, pulling into a parking lot trying to go to Rallies. It was called back then. It's called Checkers now, but yeah, you know, I was profiled, as I said, you know, me and a buddy of mine, it was late night. We thought the fast food joint by my house was open. Turned out they were closed. We pulled into the lot, and the lot to the Checkers or Rallies at the time was adjoined into another plaza, and the entire plaza was empty, and there were just 2 cops just sitting there parked doing whatever they were doing. And I came in, I pulled in, we noticed that the Checkers was closed. And then so we made a U-turn and left the parking lot. Then all of a sudden the cops showed up behind us. And here I am, young, you know, thinking I'm just being, you know, harassed because I'm black or whatever stupid nonsense I was thinking at the time. And they just simply pulled me over because they just said, your maneuver looks suspicious. Why'd you come into the parking lot? It appeared to them that once I saw them, that's when I decided to leave the parking lot. They didn't know that I was simply going to try and get a bite to eat. And then when I noticed that they were closed, I left. I wasn't doing anything illegal. It might have mildly inconvenienced me, but that's okay. You know, you deal with those kinds of things, you know, in life when you don't walk around with a chip on your shoulder like many young black men do. And all I had to do was have, you know, a little inconvenient conversation for about 5 or 10 minutes, and I would have went on about my business. But I had to give the cop attitude. I drove for about another mile before I pulled over because I just wanted to be an a-hole because I wasn't too far from my house. So I pulled all the way up into my garage, my driveway at home. So by the time I pulled up in front of my house, the police officer had an attitude because he said, you saw me behind you. It took you so long to stop. And I'm like, well, I wasn't doing anything. I was close to my house, so I just wanted to go home anyway. So, you know, it was just this big back and forth that didn't even need to be. And, you know, what I was not wise enough to realize back then is that for whatever reason that they were there, I mean, who exactly knows why they were there, but maybe they were there because they were summoned to the scene because, you know, who knows that there may have been a crime in commission or whatever the case may be. And those police officers may very well have saved me from the individual that they were actually there to see. But I wasn't wise enough to understand that then. But I do realize now that what I did look very suspicious. And all it took was a 5-minute conversation. And, you know, I could have went on and lived my life. And, you know, worst case scenario, it could have ended up badly. And then next thing you know, you got Benjamin Crump and everybody coming out of the woodwork, justice for Charles Littleton, because I done messed around and mouthed off to a cop and resisted arrest. One thing led to another, passions flare. And next thing you know, I'm dead at the age of 19, 20 years old, over something insignificant. And the whole narrative would have been what? That he was young, he was black, he didn't do nothing, he wasn't bothering nobody, and look what the police did to him.
He was about to turn his life around.
Just about to turn my life around. But I was, you know, fortunate enough to walk away from that situation. But it happened more times than you know, I like to admit. But again, not like, you know, like Rick said and like Blanche alluded to, a lot of policing, and of course, like I said, we all know Rick is the resident expert on the panel when it comes to this. 99% of good police work is just based upon, you know, hunches and discretions.
Right.
Police officers base that upon experience, being out there in the streets, knowing the lifestyle, knowing what to look for, knowing who to look for. And, you know, police officers have to be, you know, within reason, of course, you know, like we always mention, there are no perfect solutions. But again, allow police officers to use their wisdom and their discretion at their disposal so that they can actually do good police work. You have these fancy people with these these fancy educations, and they're sitting in their offices in their nice tidy suits, who are not out there in the street, who are not familiar with the criminal element. And those people like Rick go out there and put their lives on the line every day. When we talk about Black Lives Matter, who do Black Lives Matter to the most? Black Lives Matter most to the men and women that go out there and actually put their lives on the line to protect the lives of strangers. But again, take the ideologues far removed from what is actually going on in the street, trying to tell people like Rick and other law enforcement professionals how to do their jobs. It's crazy.
On that note, let me ask you guys a question. You guys are very astute, and you guys are just so awesome. When you're driving in a car on the street, have you ever tried to figure out, when you probably have better eyes than me? My vision after some of my injuries and breaking my neck has really taken a hit. But so when you look at different cars, how often are you able to see the race of the person actually driving the car?
Hardly ever, unless I'm like, look.
So why do we pull over cars? Why do we pull over cars? So sometimes after 2 o'clock in the morning, we're taillight chasing. We see a taillight that turns around somewhere at 2 o'clock in the morning, neighborhood we know has got problem, but we're accelerating up to go run their plates and see what they're really up to. And then we try and see, okay, they committed that, they get nervous. We can't see who it is until we pull them over 99 times out of 100.
All right.
Even go further.
Rick, let me ask you a question, Rick. I got it.
Michelle Obama said that Sasha and Malia, she was scared for them because
they're Black.
Because people might see the cops might see what they look like. They might see the back of their head or something and know that they were Black. I mean,
yeah, it doesn't work with that, especially with the weaves that those girls had in.
I remember the fall back when the Ferguson riots occurred, and then of course when we found out that the hands up don't shoot narrative was a lie, and then all of a sudden it was a shift to just the overall climate of the Ferguson police, because Michael Brown may not have been innocently shot, but the Ferguson Police Department was racist anyway, because they had all of these data and statistics to back up the fact that Blacks are far more likely to be pulled over, and they were issued a disproportionate percentage of tickets and so on and so forth. There was all this stuff. The Ferguson Police Department was racist anyway, and so the whole outrage was sort of justified. But then what we come to find out, and there was also similar studies done. I think was it the mayor of New Jersey, or not the mayor of New Jersey, the governor of New Jersey, or the mayor of one of the cities in New Jersey did a study. Actually did the study multiple times, because again, there was this prevailing notion that Blacks are racially profiled and they get pulled over more. And so what was discovered by way of both independent bodies that conducted these studies were, yes, Blacks were more disproportionate or were more likely to get pulled over, but they were also more likely to be the ones committing traffic violations. So what we completely just eradicate and remove from the conversation is what actually happens on the ground, which is human behavior. I just had a sort of question for Rick, because when it comes to such things as speeding or having a tail light out, again, these kind of normal things could happen with just regular everyday people, expired license plates and these kinds of things. When I think about this, I think about the whole kind of narrative surrounding New York City policing and what they did, and the broken windows policing and going after people for jumping turnstiles and all of these things. I think in my mind, there's this sort of general disregard for protocol from the ground up, and it all kind of centers around the very kind of core principle that undergirds Western civilization, which is the principle of private property. And what I mean by that, for example, is if someone is willing to say, total disregard for your private property and were to just walk across your grass, the person who walk across your grass isn't necessarily a murderer, or the person that jumps the turnstile or breaks a window may not necessarily be a murderer. But did you see in your experience this kind of this link between, like, say, for example, someone who's willing to commit a petty crime, like urinate in public, this kind of disregard for protocol, this general disregard for civility, is that person likely to either commit a more serious offense in the future And or is that person the same person who is at the time kind of committing more violent offenses, while they are in fact committing more petty offenses, if you will, because they have a general disregard for law and order? Do you understand? Do you understand what I mean?
I do. The simple answer to your question is yes. But let's add a little bit more layers to it. So it's a spot on. So if we don't have respect for common decency, morality, for authority figures, for family figures, for mothers, for fathers, for life itself, no matter what its form is, then we're going to see higher rates of criminality in every culture and every family with an individual. Let's take a look at some really easy cases to pick apart, and they're fun studies of itself. We can take a look at Ted Bundy or Jeffrey Dahmer or any one of our serial killers. And Ted Bundy is somebody I'd love to talk about. We can talk about many of the other different serial killers. I've studied about them and even taught about them in college. We look at how they didn't start out as the classic criminal, suddenly deciding they wanted to do the crimes that they were well known for. It started with a little touch here, a little step here. Started with insects, a disregard for life. It started animals, started disregard for life. It started disrespecting people in the community. It started more and more and more, and they were allowed to think, and this is gonna, again, offensive to some people, they began to think that they were special, that they were different. They could do these things because they could, whether it was the victim mentality, and there is actually something called victimization that we used to talk about too, the victim mentality I used to talk about and do classes about. Once you get caught into that, so you begin justifying what you're doing because you're able to either demonize the target or able to victimize yourself, that you are now entitled to, whether mama treated you bad, or women treated you bad, or men treated you bad, or people did this, or you don't get this, and because you think you're entitled to something in society.
As far as got it.
So, and it gets that entitlement, that sense of you should be allowed to, because if it feels good, do it, kind of an aspect. Because when that's allowed to take root, and of course, minus the aberrant personality types, that 10% we originally talked about, we'll find that the average person begins slipping down that slope very quickly. If it starts with pornography, okay, it's legal, you have a right to do it. Just because you have a right doesn't mean you should.
Right.
So if, let's say, I begin dabbling in pornography, and I'm like, oh, this looks good, and I get that instant gratification, mentally, physically, what have you, begins affecting the serotonin levels in my body, et cetera. It starts going off, and I get that fix. Well, here's something occurs, and this occurs with drugs too. We've seen this, we know this. This occurs with violence or addictive behaviors of any type, that our brain is inherently lazy. And if we're now going to get this sense of pleasure from whatever it is we do, and we take the easy route out, whatever it may actually be for, our brain's like, okay, this is good. I don't have to produce these chemicals as much anymore because you're going to get them from an external source. I don't have to look for it as hard. I don't have to regulate myself as hard. You're adding these other things, and you're getting these false sources of whatever the chemical is for your brain. And now you seek that. You want that. It's addictive. And it begins filling in those voids or whatever it might be. And we begin getting further and further into it when there's no checks and balances. And instead of teaching people, hey, respect for life. Because if we truly respected the dignity and sovereignty of life, then the overt sexuality and pornography, the over-sexualization of culture wouldn't necessarily occur. And keep in mind, I don't consider myself, many might, but I don't consider myself a prude in any respect. But the idea of understanding that if we truly respect humanity, we truly respect life, respect property, respect others, teach our children respect for those things, then we see those people are less likely to violate that because they recognize, well, I'm giving respect and I'm respecting others. And I can't control anybody else's behavior, but I can control mine. And I have a sense of honor. I have a sense of respect for my family. I teach my kids all the time. Right. Look, you cannot control anybody else's behavior out there, but you can yours. And you will behave in the way that you've been taught that represents his family, our God that we serve. You will behave that way. And if not, I will come down on you.
I gotta take off, guys, and leave the stream. I just want to give my parting close out. Let you guys take the rest of it. Everything Rick said is spot on, and if you know anything about us here on this show, of course, the issue for us, and I can safely say that I speak for all of us, especially Chad, Blanche, and Quisha, and that is, of course, that the problem is cultural. We're asking the law to do something that the law is not constitutionally permitted to do, nor is it equipped to do. The issue is far more at the core of each individual. And of course, it begins with the home and all those other good things. This whole criminal justice reform movement, again, it's rooted in this whole Marxist progressive ideology that is going to reduce our civilization to a state of barbarism. And listening to Rick and some of the other things that have been said reminds me, I don't know if you all are familiar with that famous speech given by Paul Harvey. For those of you, I highly encourage anyone, go and you can probably find it on YouTube. It's a speech by Paul Harvey. It's about 3 minutes long. It's called The Policeman. When you listen to Paul Harvey break down and give his opinions on police, again, it's a 3-minute speech by Paul Harvey, famous conservative journalist, was awarded the Medal of Freedom by George W. Bush in 2005, gave a famous speech called The Policeman. And I think Paul Harvey hit the nail on the head, when it comes to just the issue of policing. Now, as far as just a wider conversation about, just all of this stuff, this is one of those conversations that we probably need a second part to do. I know we didn't even talk about the whole, I figured we would get into the cocaine versus crack in the 80s and, Reagan's covert war against communism in Latin America and Iran-Contra and all this stuff, because we blame a lot of this stuff on the crack era, which, to me, in my mind, a lot of these things are just pure myths and excuses. But anyway, I digress. Thanks for joining the show, Rick. I see you guys, Chad, Blanche, Quisha. I'll check you guys out next week, but it's getting past my bedtime. I got to check out. So y'all have a good night.
God bless.
All right.
Yep.
See you later. Thank you so much. I did, as we wrap it up here, we're actually over 3. Chad, do you want to go ahead and play that last clip and everybody kind of give their final takes?
Overwhelmingly passing a major prison and sentence reform bill, the vote 87-12. The bill known as the First Step Act.
A Christmas miracle just happened tonight. As you and I both know, since 1988, when George H.W. Bush put out that Willie Horton ad, both political parties then rushed to build prisons and be tough on crime. And we've been trapped for decades now in this dynamic that you just can't do anything to move in a smarter direction. That nightmare began to come to an end tonight. 87 senators, both political parties came together to do something to try to begin to reduce the number of people behind bars for too long. And what this bill does is unbelievable. It means that 100% of people who are behind bars in the federal system can stay out of trouble and come home a little bit sooner. Half of them can work hard and earn their way home sooner. 100% of the women behind bars can no longer be shackled when they're giving birth and mistreated. 100% of juveniles can no longer be put in solitary confinement. And that horrible crack cocaine disparity where 100 to 1, if you had crack and powder cocaine are the same. You put a little baking soda in it for the hood, it's called crack. Your yacht club with the powder is called cocaine. Of the 100 to 1 that you were sentenced worse with crack, Obama was able to pull that down to 18 to 1, but they wouldn't let him make it retroactive. Tonight, the Senate voted to make it retroactive, which means there are 3,000 people sitting in prison right now who will get to come home soon because they're serving outdated, unfair sentences. Listen, this is like the 1959 Civil Rights Act. People think about, no, 64, 65. No. First, you had 1959, which broke the logjam.
This was the first step.
That was the first step. This is the first step. People go, well, Dan, it doesn't do this, it doesn't do that. It's not called the last step. It's called the first step. We will get to all these other issues, but you had to make it safe. And I'm going to say something that I have to be honest. Donald Trump shocked me and a bunch of people by doing the right thing on this. People thought, because he's, you know, from my point of view, he's been wrong on 99 issues, that he can never be right on one. On this issue, every time people made a prediction that Donald Trump was going to sell us out, turn on us, wasn't going to use political capital, he came harder. And as a result, it is now safe for people in both political parties to speak honestly. We know this prison system not working. It's wasting money, sending people home bitter and not better. And Donald Trump has got to get the credit. He stood up. Obama did it first. Obama did it first, and now Trump's done it.
But he did have the support of many Republicans. There were a few hardliners like Tom Cotton and Mitch McConnell.
And they got crushed like little bugs.
But
let's see. So I wanted to play that because when he mentioned the crack and cocaine disparity, what do you know about that in particular? So he's basically, that was the whole thing. Like crack was being more, you were sentenced harder for crack than you were for cocaine. Have you seen that to be true? Do you think that that's like a real thing? What do you think, Rick?
So
sorry.
you're looking at this for over several decades. I've seen the courts come down the hardest in certain communities who were primarily affected, let's say, with methamphetamine. So those courts and law enforcement officers said, we need to target and hammer methamphetamine. We see that going on with fentanyl, that now we're going to hit you harder with fentanyl to scare people off the streets. And we saw that with crack in different neighborhoods that are impacted by crack. And so you're going to find the courts as a whole and should be, and let's take some of the human aspects out of it just a minute ago, just looking at it as a whole. If a community or an area of the public is being affected by one type specific of whatever crime it might be, then we're going to make an example of that crime. So we did see, especially coming where people that were slinging methamphetamine and rocks, they got hit twice as hard in certain communities than they did with crack. Then I saw other communities where crack was destroying those communities, some areas in San Bernardino. So they got hit harder and they were going after those guys doing crack. Cocaine, real cocaine that he's talking about, that is very rare in most communities. It's there, it's very rare. And now, is cocaine horrifically dangerous and problematic and addictive and deadly and needs to be just bad? Yes, most definitely. Okay. But we have to, this is where we look at sometimes we need to attack the symptoms as well as the root cause of the problem. We have to attack it from both the front and the back end of these different aspects. So to a certain degree, there is some truth in certain communities that did happen, but we have to look at, see, why did that happen? Being law enforcement officer, I want to take the big bads off the street that are hurting my community.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say the big bad right now, which everybody talks about, is fentanyl. And I can maybe even agree that's a problem, but I see more problems still with methamphetamine. But let's go to different aspects. And some other communities, even crack and heroin, depending what it is. And depending on my community, I know my community. And if my community is being impacted most dramatically by a certain drug, by a certain crime, by whatever it is, even let's say tagging, you're tagging up the areas, which we know is the kind of basically how gangs begin marking their territory. I'm going to hit you really hard. I'm going to make sure every crime I can get you with, you're going to get nailed, and we're going to document it. Well, you're just going after these guys, and it's not this crime, not that. No, we go after to the crimes that are actually, that we believe are most overtly impacting the community negatively. I think I said that correctly. Yeah. So there are times, where you're going to see, this guy who was slinging rock at a schoolyard or in a certain neighborhood that's been demoralized by crack cocaine, and this guy who got busted with the same amount or equivalent of cocaine. Well, did he impact his community as much? Should we argue that, they could be both treated exactly the same? We can make a definite argument for that. But we have to look which community was more demoralized. Who am I more invested in destroying? I know this sounds really bad to use those words. I want to destroy that mentality that's destroying that community. And this is again, the wealthier people that can afford pure cocaine. All right. They keep a lot of that stuff in-house. When we catch them, we do hammer them. And we're proud of that. We in the department. We talk about the look who I got, this, that, and the other. We know they got more money. We got to make sure it's tagged in differently. We go after as much as we can, and that money may help them, and the defense may help them more. But again, from a law enforcement perspective, what do I go after? I go after, and same with the low-level DAs, because we worked hand in hand with a lot of those in law enforcement. Several of them were very solid men and women that I worked with over the years that I trusted. That we would get together and say, this is what's going on with my community. They would say, well, what do I need to do to help? Well, I'm going to come after these guys. I'm going after this gang. I'm going after this drug. I'm going after this group, whatever it might be. I need you to be behind me. I want to make an example of them. So if they know that they bring X, Y, and Z into my community, I'm coming.
That makes a lot of sense. So basically, you're saying that it was kind of the culture of that of a particular community is where, but it got blown up to being a national issue. Oh, they're going after crack in the Bronx in New York, so now it's everywhere. Like they're doing this everywhere, when probably it was just the Bronx in New York, because that's where it was happening a lot. So that makes a lot of sense. And then like in Connecticut, there's a lot of Italians there. That's where I grew up, and so maybe Coke is a big thing there. So, there's a big focus on that there. So, but people don't look at it like that. They see these stories and they think it's like, oh my God, because it's a national news, doesn't necessarily mean it's a national problem.
And again, all these things are, sin ultimately is a problem that we all have to face. And it manifests itself in different ways in different communities, different aspects. And then we need to approach, okay, what is the real problem now with gang membership and drugs or prostitution, whatever it might be, whatever sin we can use it. Now I'm using kind of churchy words, but the idea and aspect is people do these things to escape from something or to fill a void. People join gangs to escape from something or to fill a void. People get involved in problematic sexual behavior to escape from something or to fill a void. People get involved in drugs to escape from something or to fill a void. That's majority of the issues. And we can look at that in all the negative aspects of behavior of humanity. It's to escape from something or to fill a void typically. If we teach people, and we go back to the beginning, that we recognize if you give people the proper tools and also the proper consequences, that 10% of the people are never going to mess with the stuff you educate them properly. 80%, if they know they can't get away with it, they're going to avoid it. If they know the consequences are not worth whatever they believe the benefit is, they're going to avoid it. And still, you're going to have 10% of the population that's going to do these things. And we can argue the anecdotal position, well, I started using because I was forced to, or I was forced to. Yes, those happen. But they are the small minority of cases. And yes, we should treat those differently. And we do need to look at culpability and responsibility and education. And as far as in the healthcare system, we do need to look at the mental illness aspects. That's one of the areas we did a study a while ago showing what came first, the mental illness or the addiction. And sometimes these people were just self-medicating. So we need to handle those differently. But there also comes sometimes you have to be responsible. If you know that driving while high increases your chances you're going to kill somebody in a car accident, well, you've now negated that your defense, and you're now culpable, and you should know. We need to hold people still responsible. It doesn't mean we can't look at the original problem and try and treat the initial reasons for that person wanting to seek to get high, to escape from whatever's going on in their life, to fill those voids. Or look, in my case, I grew up in kind of two different cultures. I grew up in a Sicilian culture and a very, very stereotypical redneck culture, kind of blended together, unique situation. And so finding male role models and finding good role models that I perceived as being good was difficult. And what I was being taught how men should behave is not how I recognized as time went on that was appropriate behavior. One of you guys mentioned comic books at one time. Yeah, comic books too. My role model, not the best role model, by the way, I chose Batman. And my character, my undercover character began getting shaped, and my mentality and what I thought. And, even on a funny note, in my law enforcement career, I never told anybody that. One of the guys, long story short, a gentleman named Billy, when I was in a fight with him and threw him over a car, I got hit by a truck. Well, after getting hit by the truck, I thought one of his partners had tried to kill me. So I'm going to take Billy out because I know if I get hit like that again, I'm going to die. Well, the explorer who was riding with me saw it was a truck. He started yelling, it was a truck that hit me. And don't kill him. I let Billy go. Well, Billy recognized, and at that point in time, he gave me the moniker of Batman. Many people began putting the logo on my unit because they said that was the most Batman blank that I've ever seen in my life. And it changed. So I had these different reputations. And unfortunately, there was some of that aspect, that character really was ingrained in me. You can even ask my children, we joke about it. And I tell them about my mistakes. But I was so desperate for a positive role model. I latched onto whatever I saw that embodied the unchanging honor and morality that I thought should exist. Of course, for me, when Christ finally found me, and when I came towards Christ, it made me realize, oh snap, I was always close, shooting in the dark and missing, and then that movement began changing my aspect and how I viewed manhood and fatherhood and husbandhood and education and policing, and it changed everything dramatically. But just like most people in society, we're looking for good role models. We're looking for role models. And if you don't give us a role model in our family, if you don't provide us those role models, we're going to find them. We're going to find the ones that look like they have the stuff that we think we want.
Yeah.
Who has the power, who has the money, who has the girls, who has the men, whatever you're into. Well, if they got that, if I be like that, then I'm going to get that. That's what we think.
Yeah, it's true. Very true. Blanche, crack cocaine.
It's a hell of a drug. Yeah, Van Jones, listen, I've always, when I used to hear people say that, more time for crack, I used to tell people, why wouldn't they? Look at the destruction that crack was causing, not just from turf wars, crack babies, prostitution. It just brought so much violence to the community. So why wouldn't it be an incentive to get crack off the streets? Most people have been snorting cocaine a long time and never did any of that stuff. I think that crack was something different, brought a different element to the community, even with the weapons. I remember in the crack era, you started seeing even the high-powered assault rifles, all that stuff hit the streets. So we can't even compare crack to cocaine. It's not even comparable. And like Rick said, cocaine is more expensive anyway. So most folks in the urban areas weren't doing cocaine. They was smoking crack.
Just to interrupt just for a second, and I want you to continue. I figured this will blow up your chat for a second. I've used cocaine. I've used crack. When I was undercover, you're going to do certain drugs. And let me tell you, crack hits different.
Crack?
Yes, ma'am.
Whoa.
It's all part of public record. I've used methamphetamine, smoked methamphetamine, crack cocaine, done cocaine. I've snorted methamphetamine. There's every usage I ever did was documented.
Have you ever done heroin?
No, you can't fake needles. And so my character I created was afraid of needles. The only thing, the bangers name, probably more than you need to know, the bangers named me Quick because I was quick to fight, drove quick, all these different, I like speed. But my character was afraid of needles. So if you suddenly pulled up a needle or suggested it, I would go ballistic and start beating the crap out of everybody in the room. So they were like, don't show a needle to Quick because he's crazy and he's going to go off. So everybody kept that down because you can't fake. Keep in mind, I simulated well over 100 times of utilizing different drugs.
Yeah.
You can fake snorting. There's different ways you can do it. You can't fake smoking. If you inhale, you inhale. I'm sorry, Clinton, you're going to get it. But the idea is, most of the time I tried to simulate or even came up with fake substances. And that's a whole nother conversation. But no, I've used both of those and it does hit different. It affects your body very different. And even though they may have the same base chemicals. Yeah.
So I'm sorry, you not only blew up the chat, you just like blew me up as well. Because then I'm like, okay, so you actually smoked crack and got high.
Yes. You can't smoke it and not get high. Anybody says that you didn't, you're going to have the effects if you're human.
Well, I mean, you said you can't fake smoking. So, okay. How were you able to, because I mean, when I hear people, they're like, oh yeah, I tried crack. They seem addicted basically from the very first time that they smoke it. How were you not able to get addicted? Or how
Mm.
did you get addicted and then you had to kind
No.
of not go to, rehab or something?
One of the reasons I was chosen, I was farmed. I didn't know it at the time, but I'd actually been farmed to be an undercover operative. That's a whole nother story. I found out that I'd been farmed. I thought it was just luck of everything pulling together and happening in the right place and have my dream career come to me, land in my lap. I thought that's how it actually worked. It wasn't towards years into my career that I actually learned how I actually ended up in that spot. That's a whole nother story for a different time. So, but my personality type, especially when I was younger, because I saw what drugs did to many of my family members. When I had a reputation in the streets where I grew up, if you were dealing anywhere near me, I was going to come after you. It didn't make me popular in different neighborhoods. And I know that sounds weird. Like I said, I took the Batman mentality a little bit too far when I was a kid. And law enforcement had gotten a hold of me and said, look, you don't need to be doing this. You need to get in martial arts and you need to fight right and these different things. And that began transforming my life. But they chose me because, and this is going to sound very prideful, when I was young and was very prideful, I was proud of my mind. I didn't want anybody or anything controlling me. And so it kept me from being addicted and even liking any of those substances. Is there anything that altered my ability to think, to interact with the world around me, that clouded my vision or changed how I saw things? From a pride perspective, I saw it as a sin against myself. So that kept me from those type of addictions. Now, did I wrestle with, and do I wrestle with certain addictions? Yeah, my addiction is, at least for the longest time, was adrenaline.
Mm-hmm.
We look at my career and different things I did in my life. Adrenaline was a big draw for me. And, which is why the undercover program was as wild and unique as it was. That's a whole nother story. And even my career during my time was very different compared to the average law enforcement officer's career because of my desire and drive to test and challenge myself and to push myself. But throughout the whole thing, I was very proud of my ability to think. In fact, there was a time that, and I'm sure many of my coworkers would say that I generally thought I was the smartest man in the room, and oftentimes was. That doesn't necessarily mean that humility when I was younger was really not there like it should have been. So that's also honest, and age has certainly changed a lot of that. But that attitude, that profile that they developed on me, is they recognized that I was less likely to become addicted than somebody who had a different mindset. I didn't have the traditional addictive personality type, and there are those personality types that are addictive. Then we also look at, now, if I continue to use on multiple occasions, and then certainly addiction is possible, and it doesn't outrule the genetic aspect, the genetic code feature, because some people are more genetically susceptible to certain drugs and addiction. So let's say you, ma'am, maybe in your family, your history, your genetic code, that maybe your drug might be, let's say, methamphetamine. And you could use heroin 3 or 4 times, you're not going to get addicted. You could use multiple times, never get addicted. You could drink alcohol like a fish, and you're not getting addicted. You can stop anytime, you don't have any withdrawal symptoms. It doesn't hit you that way. But then the first time you use heroin, methamphetamine, the first time you use methamphetamine, you're hooked. You're done. Because that genetic key has just been placed into that lock that unlocked that addiction process in you. Because you recognize addiction process, there's a lot to it. There's the psychological component, but we also have the genetic component as well, the biological component. And that's sometimes not addressed properly. There's multiple reasons for addiction. We all start maybe in the same area, or at least, fill that void or escape for something. For me, using these different drugs, if I didn't use, they were going to kill me. You don't want to die like that. If I'm going to die, and they're right there looking at you, making sure you're using, and they're right there with guns at you, and you're doing it, and you're going to show the man you love it, and you're playing this role.
Right.
But at the same time, then every time I used, we documented it. My handlers knew and they understood, and we documented my symptoms. I was also a case study because of that.
Rick, you keep messing with your nose and sniffing. People are
So one of the reasons I did so well undercover, and even today, is I have horrific allergies. And also so I looked like a tweaker when I was young and thin and everything else. It blended in great. I still do those things. And then I'm going to pick on myself some more. So after my injuries, I broke my neck and back, which is why I retired from law enforcement and started my own companies once they pieced me back together. And then at a certain point, my vision went from being very, very good to my good eye is now 2,600. I'm legally blind.
Oh, wow.
But my bad eyes, I think 2,900 was the last thing. And so glasses don't work for me. Normal contacts don't work for me. I went through some specialized surgeries and they stabilized my vision. And now I have these huge contacts that they're called sclera. They take up my whole eyes. And since I have been up the entire night, because actually, besides being a pastor and besides doing the jail ministry, I also work because my wife said I was fat, get off the couch, kind of thing. And she'll deny that, but that's what I heard anyway. And now I end up working through the night so I can still spend time with my family. So my contacts have been in for a very long time. And they get very painful. And I don't like interacting things because without these, I cannot see my hand in front of my face. And that's not an exaggeration.
Oh,
With
wow.
these contacts in, my vision has been, thanks to the miracle of modern medicine and through Christ leading me to the right people at the right time, obviously, that my vision is now 20/35 with these in. But without them, oh no, man, this computer doesn't exist in my hand. It was stretched out far, doesn't exist past that point. So it's,
Wow.
so yeah, you see that, no, and when my eyes are hurting, allergies, bad allergy season with all the rains are getting here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I look like a tweaker. Which
So
is wonderful.
when you mentioned that you tried to crack it, in the beginning of the show, I said, yeah, you looked high. Now we're like side-eyeing you now, Rick, but
no, it's okay. It's okay. And
but do you have anything that you want the audience to know about, a book or a show or anything that
two
following you on Twitter or anything?
For the longest time, I've kind of been in the limelight helping other people, or not limelight, in the shadows, helping other people out in different programs and different organizations and giving information and trying to plant those seeds. I am going to be coming out with several other people with an actual podcast. We're trying to talk about these from a different cultural perspective, and we're going to even work harder to support guys like you, which I love. Your individual cast and your individual names. And I saw the different people popping up like, yeah, I know him. I know her. This is cool. And I've seen you guys. And I think it's awesome. And of course, Chad, I've watched the different movies and everything. And I pushed them out to everybody that I can. I love people that come with truth, that seek the truth and admit that they don't know everything, but willing to learn and take different sides and look at it from the appropriate angle. So I want people to do that. But some of the things I want people to look at is, sometimes our positions, like many of the people I talk to in the prison, these people, like I said, have been there for years, and they will tell me it's been a blessing. Me breaking my neck and back. If you'd have talked to me the very first part of the year, I prided myself on my strength, my fighting prowess, my ability, my mind, my reputation. Man, my head was too big. I couldn't get out of the room half the time. But that became that pain that I've gone through, the different struggles that I've gone through because of those injuries, because of the loss of the career, because of the different aspects. The pain that I've gone through has been such a blessing in my life. Mm. Sometimes the prisons we find ourselves in, whether the psychological, sociological, spiritual, or physical, aren't because they're not actually a torture. They're a blessing. There was a gentleman that spent some time in the gulags for over 8 years, named Alexander, and I would kill his last name, and I don't want to do that. But one of the end of his letters, I want you to listen to something. He said, "That is why I turn back to the years of my imprisonment, and I say, sometimes to the astonishment of those about me, bless you, prison. I have served enough time there. I have nourished my soul there, and I say without hesitation, bless you, prison, for having been in my life." Years ago, when you would have asked me about my injuries and loss of my career and the change in direction and finances and everything when they began to collapse, I was beat down. I was broken, but that's exactly where I needed to be. I didn't know how misdirected or broken I really was before those injuries. I thought I was this good. I thought I was that tough. I thought I was the person that could save everyone. It wasn't in that humility till I found myself in that prison of pain, of psychological, emotional, and spiritual pain, physical pain, that I actually saw the real blessings and became a better example to my family and to my community, and really changed my perception. So with anybody who's listening to this, recognize where you're at and see the blessings and what are you to learn? Why are you there? And recognize that where you're at may not be where you want to be, but it might be where you need to be, whether it's in prison, inside or outside. And then one other thing, he had mentioned Paul Harvey, and I'm sure you guys are familiar with this. He mentioned the speech he gave on police. I recommend listening to the speech that Paul Harvey did. You can find it all over the videos on the tube of you. It's quoted as, "If I were the devil." I played that role. I've been the devil in communities to a certain degree. It's when I was undercover, that was my role. Listen to it and understand. He didn't know or understand that it was so prophetic. It fits today in society where we're at now. Listen to that and take a look at the world around you and tell me if that doesn't make sense. And then take a look at yourself. Are you as good as you think you are? If not, don't look for yourself for a savior. Look outward. Look to Christ.
Wow, that is great advice, Rick. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been very enlightening and a really great conversation. So we will say, you can go ahead and enjoy the rest of your night, and we'll wrap up the show. But thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Rick. Or should I say Bruce Wayne?
God bless you guys, and I hope to see you guys again.
All right.
Absolutely. Thank you.
You want to read these super stickers so we can go?
Yes. Let's see.
Rick said, "Yeah, I smoke crack." He was like,
"Are you go? Oh, am I reading them?"
Yeah, I can read them.
Okay.
Where did we leave off? We left off at, I think. Oh, really?
Oh, we
No,
did that.
no, yeah.
I think it was Jero B.
Jero B.
Jero B.
Okay. Miss Pamela Callahan, thank you for the super sticker. Dear Woke Christian, Shadow Jackson, wears white Air Force Ones. Get some more. Thank you, dear Woke Christian.
What does that even mean?
What's wrong with white Air Force Ones?
I don't know what that means.
I wear black Air Force Ones.
Stephen Carter, at the end of the day, some will LARP as a Vic Mackey and some will LARP as Nino Brown or some low IQ rapper, but it's all caste system role play. Thank you for the super sticker, Stephen Carter. Y'all didn't like that quote? Y'all didn't understand it?
Hold on, I can't even see the screen.
What?
At the end of the day, some will. What does LARP mean? A Vic Mackey, and some will LARP as Nino Brown or some low IQ rapper, but it's a caste system role play. That went over my head.
Mine
Maybe
too.
Chuck would get it. I want to screenshot that and try to educate myself, as woke folks say. You need to educate yourself.
Okay, let me hold on. Because y'all ain't woke enough.
Is that? Oh well. Let me. Are you finished reading?
No, I'm not done. I'm sorry.
Screenshot it.
GG Ryder, Chuck, at Chuck, outright crime exists, then corruption, which could be unethical, but could be legal. A question of amount or degree. What if government aimed for zero tolerance for corruption? Total control system. Yeah, I don't know.
We might have had too much crack influence tonight. We're not getting things.
Well, I guess maybe he's saying if the government did zero tolerance for corruption, it would lead to total system control. Maybe I don't know. I don't want y'all to figure it out. Blanche, the stash gets a like of its own. Thank you, Angel Wings.
Yeah, the stash was good comment. Good commentary tonight.
I'm jealous.
Rick Halfsteed, great show as always. God loves you all. Thank you, Rick.
Thanks, you. Rick.
Gigi Ryder, Blanche, Sigmund Freud said cocaine was a health stimulant. Cocaine, wine was popular product in Europe. Coca-Cola invented by pharmacists in Georgia.
Yeah.
Yep. Cocaine goes way back.
Yes, it does. Cocaine is a hell of a drug, said Rick
James.
Rick James, yeah.
I'm Rick James.
Quisha, I smoked one hit in college of opium tar, typically mild, instantly obsessed with stealing to buy bulk. Later told it was probably refined heroin.
Okay.
Wow. Thank you, Gigi Ryder, for the listen. We're not judging you. As long as you keep giving these super stickers, you can tell us all the drugs you want to tell us about. Thank you so much.
I'm glad you're not addicted.
Yeah.
Praise God. That is a blessing. Thank you guys so much for the super stickers and super chat.
Have you ever done any drugs, Quisha?
I have done marijuana. Look at Blanche. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's it.
Who'd you smoke weed with?
Oh no, Chad. She did more than that.
Yeah, I know she did. She did some LSD.
I smoked a joint with Puff Daddy, actually.
What?
Puff Daddy and TD Jakes?
Have you ever been swallowed?
Yo. Okay. Moving on.
Okay,
so you really did. You really did smoke weed with Sean Diddy Combs. Tell us more about this.
It wasn't anything. It wasn't at one of his parties. We were all at a nightclub.
Oh, okay. I was in public. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Very
Wow, Quisha. We didn't know that we were dealing with an associate of Diddy and Company.
Right. You can get paid, Quisha. You sure you look at you funny? You sure you didn't do something?
You should meet to
Here
him.
we go. Blanche trying to pimp.
Listen, Keisha, you can get paid. He throwing out money now. Listen, Keisha, listen. You can get rich quick.
We rich.
Hey, what other drugs have you done, Quisha?
Moving on.
Hey, there's no shame on this side of the. I mean, there's shame, but you're on this side of the cross. So,
boy, the liberals can't wait to hear this. They sit there ready.
Oh,
Media matters.
I think that it is being on the other side now that I can look back and say, like, that's not something that you want to do, so I don't
you could
shy
be
away from it.
You could be helping somebody who's fighting addiction right now by saying, yeah, I was on that stuff too, and look at me now.
And I wasn't. I'm not.
I was strung out too. Listen, I was out there. I was strung out. I was out there.
Oh my God, no, but moving on. Go ahead.
Did y'all sing that song in church? You grew up in church, Quisha?
Mm-hmm.
Did y'all sing that song? You better get up off of that cocaine, get on off of that crack, get yourself together, get your mind back. Can't you see for yourself? Can't you see for yourself? Can't you see with yourself for yourself what drugs are doing? Y'all didn't see that in church?
Heck no.
Is that real?
That sounds like an after school special song. Get up off of that crack.
I want to try to find it real quick.
Anyway, criminal justice reform a Black issue? No, it is not.
It's not.
That's my piece.
It's not.
Okay.
Although the Bliggity Blacks are the ones that do celebrate it, though.
True. Chad just disappeared.
Looking for that song.
Chad looking for
Oh, here it is.
Oh God.
Okay. I'm gonna pull it up on the screen. Hold on. You better get on off for that.
So Blanche, what about you? Have you ever tried any?
Just goodness. Just weed. Just marijuana.
We can't hear anything.
You can't hear it?
No, it was still toggling.
Hold on, let me try.
He's singing his heart out too. He's sweating. Yeah, Keith, just alcohol, just marijuana, alcohol, and hookah.
Leatherface says cap.
Y'all can't hear that?
Nope.
Ah.
Do you have to click that button? Sometimes I think there's one that says play sound with the.
Let me see if I can do it. It was called "Get Up Off the Crack." What's it called?
Yeah, it's called if you Google, I'm sorry, not Google. It's can't you see what drugs are doing?
Okay.
Can't you see what drugs are doing by Reverend F.C. Barnes. Wonder why they didn't play the audio. Yeah, we used to have to sing that in church back in the day. Kojit, Church of God in Christ. You better get on off for that cocaine. Get on off for that crack. Get yourself together and get your mind back.
It should play.
Did y'all see Jennifer Lewis's unhinged rant?
Oh my goodness. Oh, she's so deplorable.
I said, I wrote the song because I want to be a help. If I was called to church or somewhere to preach on drugs, many people wouldn't dare come. I learned that people will listen to a song that won't listen to a sermon.
Oh gosh.
But God wants us to get it to them the best way we can. If they will listen and think. Hallelujah. I believe we can reach somebody. They're trying to get the pusher, but I'm trying to reach the user as well. Because if people stop using it, the pusher won't have nobody to push it to. Amen. Everybody ought to be able to see what drugs are doing. Oh, yeah. You don't have to use drugs to make a living. Oh, no. You don't have to use drugs to survive. You know what happens to you? It'll make you think you're getting ahead. But before you know it, it will kill you dead. Can't you see for yourself what drugs will do? Deborah?
Come unto Jesus. Come on today. Jesus loves you. Good drugs away. You need to get up off of that cocaine. And get up off of that crack. You need to get yourself together. And get your mind back. Can't you see for yourself what drugs are doing?
It will put $1 in your hand. But look what they're doing to your health, man. Hallelujah. It will make you feel good for just a little while, but it will drive you crazy and you why. Can't you see for yourself what's trouble?
Hey.
Come unto Jesus.
You need to come on right now.
Come on today. Jesus loves you.
You need to put that stuff away.
Put drugs away.
Get up off of that
If you ever do it right now, and get yourself together.
Get yourself together.
And get your
And get your mind back.
Yes, sir.
Can you see for yourself what
Amen.
Look what they're doing to the boys and girls. They're killing and stealing all over this world. Hallelujah. I want to tell you, and this is a fact, it is doing the white just like the black. Can't you see for yourself what's trouble? I like that.
Oh, I love it. I love this song.
He's a friend to your children. He'll put his arms around you.
Yay.
If I were you, I would put it away.
Now that music
I
is.
wouldn't take no chances with it. They can put something in that stuff, you know. And get your mind.
And get your mind back. Okay, all right.
He about to start. He about to start preaching now. You ain't gonna let y'all lead the church.
I said, get yourself together.
I like that song. Chad, you butchered it though.
Get your money back.
Chad, you butchered it. It doesn't look like what you did.
No, we used to sing that in church back in the day, back in the 90s. Can't you see for yourself what drugs are doing?
Amen. Usher.
Well, you guys.
We were 6 and 7 years old singing this song, having no idea what crack and cocaine was.
For real?
Yeah, in church, because I mean, drugs wasn't a problem in my community where I grew up, but we were singing the song.
All right. Yeah, you know what? I have actually been working on some music stimulated students. So, you know.
Got something coming out, Keish?
I might do a little EP.
Okay.
You know, maybe like 5 songs.
Okay.
You know. So yeah.
We'll buy it.
I don't understand why people are saying that I'm off. Like, I feel like I sounded just like them. Homegirl with the glasses.
Okay.
Somebody said it was an abundance of Jerry curls in the crowd.
Oh, look, Blanche. Gigi Ryder, $2. Quisha singing. Look. Go ahead. You know how you do.
Oh, yeah, that's right, y'all. Yeah, y'all. Y'all pay up. Listen. I was about to tax Rick because Rick talking about you beautiful. Yeah, you
Pass the plate. Pass the plate around.
Yeah, you open a tab up.
Yeah, do y'all see what I go through? The Blanche pimp me. Pimp me out. Telling me I need go on OnlyFans and everything.
I want to show that song to my kids. I'm gonna try to get their minds right.
I mean, it actually doesn't sound bad though. Like, I mean, it actually sounds pretty good. I mean, somebody said he rhymed wild and wow, like wow and wild.
He said it's doing the whites just like it's doing the blacks. I don't know about that part.
Oh no.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Deshaunay. Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Oh, the plate's going around?
Yeah. Keep saying it, Keisha.
Oh. Look, y'all know I
You was like, y'all paying? Let's go. Listen.
Hey, Quisha, you were convicted by that song with your past your when you was on that stuff.
Y'all better quit. I was not on no stuff. And no, I was not convicted by the song. Y'all crazy. Okay, everybody. We are actually doing a show here. We are actually doing a show, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you. We will see you next Sunday at 7:30-ish because we're black. We don't smoke crack, but we black. We love you guys for watching. Thank you, Angel. Thank you to all the moderators. Thank you to the best chat on the internet because y'all keep it lively. Y'all had me cracking up.
It was lit tonight, man.
Yeah, y'all were lit. So thank you again, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Can't you see